Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Y'all Mean Revolution, and we the media, the mainstream media, the fake news, they are solid about the Christian massacres in Syria. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, revolution is a way of life. Revolution is for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I got some revolutionary dinner for y'all. Let's get to it.
The United States and the European Union are acting so surprised that the Syrian regime has allowed killing of innocent civilians in Syria, even though the people who run Syria now, after the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad, are known al-Qaeda terrorists. The State Department has long since known that. We are not surprised, and neither is Kevork Almassian, our next guest. He is an Armenian Orthodox Christian who was born in Syria, award-winning journalist who has been warning about this on Redacted for more than 3 years. He joins us to discuss this violence that was easily foreseeable. Kevork, thank you for joining us. And can you explain the scope of what's happening and whether or not it's nascent? Maybe it's nascent to the news, but not us.
The number of the casualties in Syria is with thousands. And today, European MEP, member of European Parliament, who was in Syria, he's from Greece, he estimates the death toll by 7,000 innocent civilians between Christians and Alawites in the coastal cities of Syria. Basically, what happened is Jolani, who is now self-elected or self-selected president of Syria, he sent his gangs, Al-Qaeda gangs, to Latakia in order to suppress the Alawite civilians there, under the claim that those are regime remnants. The videos that we receive and the footage we receive from Syria are overwhelmingly of civilians. Kids, children, even newborn babies and women and men, they have been executed in daylight in the streets, and all documented on video, because the goal is not only to kill, but is also pleasure. They're having pleasure by killing all these ordinary people. And we have warned about this for a long time, because we have cases in the past that we can build on and see on which side received all these weapons. Basically, they are Al-Qaeda affiliates. The leader of this group is the founder of the Al-Qaeda offshoot in Syria. He was the partner of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He used to send car bombs in Iraq, in Shia neighborhoods, in order to kill civilians. Therefore, we have a track record that we can build on. However, Jake Sullivan in 2012, he said Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria in his email to Hillary Clinton. Later, we have Hillary Clinton herself admitting that civil war, sectarian civil war in Syria is not necessarily a bad thing, because then this could benefit Israel in the region. Because
yes,
this
I have
will
an
lead
image
into...
of that. We learned this from WikiLeaks. I'd like to bring that up while you're talking. Please continue.
Yeah, and in this case, Hillary Clinton knew that this type of warfare that they have waged against Syria by giving all these weapons to the radical elements in the Syrian society and importing all these multinational Takfiri jihadi groups into Syria, this will lead eventually into mass murder of the religious and ethnic minorities, because the Takfiris do not see the Christians and the Alawites and the other ethnic and religious minorities as human beings. In their minds, once you open your eyes and you were born a Christian, they can kill you. This is in their ideology. Therefore, giving them weapons and then acting surprised and shocked that something like this happened. Imagine the audacity of the European Union, that they not only act shocked, but they blame the victims. They said this killing in Syria happened due to the Assad regime remnants. And not, like, all these civilians were killed.
That's what they're calling them. They're saying that they're actively protesting on behalf of Bashar al-Assad. That doesn't look like the case to me. It looks like they're actively trying to live their lives. Can you explain that nuance, please?
Natalie, when Saddam Hussein was overthrown, this was a terminology used by the United States in order to follow the resistance in Iraq and kill them by saying those are Saddamists or those are the Saddam regime remnants. And now they copy this experience in Syria, and this is being repeated also by Arabic press, that those are the supporters of Assad. But the truth of the matter is, if Assad returns tomorrow to Syria, I assure you, the so-called Assad loyalists and Assad regime remnants, they're the ones who are going to kill him because he abandoned them and he fled to Moscow. So in their eyes of this resistance who is fighting against Jolani's gangs, Assad is a traitor. This is how they see it. But in the press, because they want to normalize the killing and bring legitimacy to the Jolani regime, they are trying to tell us that Assad in Moscow is waging an insurgency against the elements of these Jolani gangs. No, Jolani kicked out the Alawites and the Christians from their jobs. The people are poor and their people cannot even secure bread. So the people reach to the edge because they have lost their jobs. There is no any government support for them, and they're being persecuted now by this gang. So of course, those who used to be in the Syrian army in the past, they will try to defend their families. But if you watch the footage, have you seen one militant from the former Syrian army soldiers in this footage? They're killing civilians. They're going from one door to another, taking people out, first torturing them, humiliating them, and then killing them under the sunlight. This is very horrendous. And I just want to say one thing. If Tulsi Gabbard by any chance is watching, she knew about it and she told the truth about Syria. Yes. That's why they demonized her. That's why they called her, she's the Assad darling or something. She knew who are these groups.
Which was what Barry Weiss called her, an Assad toady, a monstrous Assad toady. Yet Barry Weiss has said nothing, or any of these, so-called I don't know what we're going to call them. We're not going to give them a label. Have said nothing about the killing of these innocent civilians. I want to ask you a little bit about how it must feel to see the State Department condemning this right now under Marco Rubio again, when people inside the Trump cabinet have predicted this.
I'm not surprised that Marco Rubio condemned it, because we have to read between the lines of this statement. He mentioned 4 minorities and said the United States stands by them. He mentioned the Druze, he mentioned the Alawites, he mentioned the Christians, and he mentioned the Kurds. And those are the 4 ethnicities and religions that they want to create mini states for them in Syria. Therefore, the creation of a sectarian civil war in Syria, where Jolani has an exclusive right for all these weapons, and he has the most weapons, he will wage these atrocities against the minorities. They knew he will do it. That's why they wanted him to come to power. So when he persecutes the Christians, the Alawites, the Kurds, and the Druze, then Israel and the United States can present themselves as the savior of these minorities. Now, Israel says that they will protect the Druze. The US says that they will protect the Kurds, and the Christians and the Alawites in the coast, they will be under the protection of the Russians and probably also Greece. So what they're trying to do is they are preparing the way for the Balkanization of Syria, the separation of Syria as a nation state into mini states. And inside Syria, there is no military or political power which can resist this project. Therefore, it is highly likely that the US, Israel, and other powers, including Russia, by the way, may be cooperating in order to divide Syria into different mini states. Some people have probably goodwill to save the minorities, but for me as a Syrian, I'm an ethnic Armenian, but I was born and raised in Syria. I believe in the Syrian nationhood. I believe in the Syrian identity. And now it's all destroyed. So we don't have a nationhood any longer.
Well, the president of Syria saying he will launch an investigation into this matter. What do we make of? Okay, you're laughing. So that's the answer. What do you make of this?
It's like Israel says that they have formed an independent investigation to see about the tragic events that happened in Gaza. Have we received the results of these investigations after 1.5 years after atrocities? None, because people will forget about them.
Netanyahu says that calling for an investigation makes you a deep state actor.
Of course, and anti-Semite as well. So we have to be careful with our words when we speak about Benjamin Netanyahu. In this case, they know that when they form a committee, and it will take time for them to investigate, people will forget about it. New events will happen. It will erase the past atrocities. Those are all smokescreen. Imagine the head of Al-Qaeda appointed members in this in this committee, one of which he has a public statement on Facebook. He is not criticizing the minorities, he's condemning the minorities few years ago, saying that they're waging war against the majority Muslim population. So in his rotten and very backward mind, he thought that the past year wars, which was a CIA engineered regime change war, was basically a war between minorities and the majority of Muslims. Therefore, the Muslims have to rule over them, which is this mindset that they want to establish a majority dictatorship over the minorities. This has nothing to do with democracy, but rather establishing a theocratic authoritarian regime headed by Jolani. Probably he will have control over Damascus, Aleppo, Homs, Idlib, but he already lost control on the rest of the country. No other sane people, civilized people, will accept to live under Jolani's rule in Syria.
Now, in 2015, President Trump said, look, Assad may be protecting people there. We don't know who would be coming in. They could be worse. But we did know, because the Obama administration is the one that sold us this idea of arming moderates. Al-Nusra is an arm of Al-Qaeda. So Americans should feel incredibly pissed off, I do, that we were fighting Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and arming them in Syria, and then pretend that we didn't think that this would happen. So can you please remind us what the tenets are of Al-Nusra as an extension of Al-Qaeda? I'll get you out of here on this.
Actually, just interestingly, that Abu Muhammad al-Jolani ended up in an American prison, CIA-led prison in Iraq in 2003 or 5, alongside Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and then they released him only the same year when the war started in Syria, and then sent them both to Syria, one of which created ISIS and the other one created Nusra. In 2012, Obama knew when he put his signature on Operation Timber Sycamore, which is a covert CIA operation in Syria for the regime change, he knew that they are arming radical Islamist elements in Syria. The Defense Intelligence Agency has given him the report telling him that the driving force behind the insurgency in Syria are the Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood jihadists. And he knowingly put his signature on the operation, hence giving $1 billion per year, weapons and ammunition and training to these jihadists in Syria. And this is only the CIA program. Then we have in parallel, the Pentagon also trained separately $500 million worth of program, all these jihadists in Syria. And then we have the regional countries. Qatar spent tens of billions of dollars in arming them. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Israel, which now pretends to come as a savior for the minorities. When the former head of Mossad was asked on Al Jazeera, why did you guys receive the Al-Qaeda elements in your hospitals and given them the treatment? He said it's a tactical move from Israel that they're dealing with these Al-Qaeda elements. And then the Israeli press themselves confessed that Israel given them light weapons, they have given them cash. USAID, how much money USAID has given to these people? Billions of dollars in 10% of the Syrian territory. All this money went into one place, which is the one small governorate where this Jolani used to control. Millions of them went to these jihadists through corrupted NGOs claiming to be humanitarian, receiving the money and then paying the salaries of the officers and the commanders of these Al-Qaeda groups. It's a complete sham. It's a complete lie, Natalie, yes, that they have sold to the American people. Now we lost our country and the world has become a more dangerous place, because if this example is copied in the Middle East, what kind of message they are sending to the rest of the Arab people and the Muslim people in the Arab world? That in order for you to come to power, you have to become one of these Al-Qaeda elements and remove your previous regimes, and for you to conquer and become to power, and then they will normalize it. You know, this is very dangerous precedent. What's happening in Syria?
Definitely. Well, you've been warning about this. We always appreciate your voice on this matter. You can follow Kevork at Kevork
and also advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. I wanted to speak with you today regarding what is going on as we speak in Syria. So I know it's not popular to recognize in the West that the Alawites, Christians, and other ethnic minorities probably had the best deal they could under Assad, and as many people predicted, when this government was toppled by HTS, we would probably see some slaughters and massacres, if not genocide, occurring. And it appears that thousands of people have now been killed. The media has somewhat been a bit slow, but now apparently reluctantly recognizing it, but still referring to it in a very cautious term as clashes and other ways of framing it. I was wondering if you could outline how you interpret or read what's happening in Syria.
I think the Iranians always expected this. And the belief from the very beginning in 2011, when the United States deployed in late 2011, when they deployed al-Qaeda in Syria, because Iranian intelligence agencies knew this, even though the Americans were hiding it and the Western media was denying it, the Iranians were saying that Western intelligence agencies are working with the Islamic State of Iraq, which was al-Qaeda back then. And the Islamic State of Iraq set up the Nusra Front, which was al-Qaeda in Syria. And Jolani, who was in the Islamic State of Iraq, he and Abu Bakr Baghdadi's deputy, he became the head of the Nusra Front. So these deeply sectarian people were slaughtering people in Iraq before they began slaughtering people in Syria. So the Iranians knew that if Syria fell, that this would happen. For the Iranians, it wasn't a matter of the Syrian government under former President Assad being some utopian state. The Iranians had no illusions about the Syrian government back then, but the alternative for the Iranians was much worse. And that's why the Iranians created this broad resistance front, which of course struggles to support the Palestinian people, but it also struggled to support the people of Syria, and then later in Iraq when ISIS was about to take Iraq and Baghdad was about to fall. So it wasn't, again, it was for Iran, it was a choice between a deeply flawed government in Syria and the Takfiri hordes that were being supported by Western intelligence agencies, by Turkey, by oil and gas rich countries in the Persian Gulf, and Jordan and the Israeli regime. What happened yesterday and the day before, I think, was inevitable. We've been seeing large numbers of minorities and moderate Sunnis and Sufis and secular people being killed in different parts of the country. But the ideology of these groups that have taken over the country would ultimately lead to this catastrophe. And they have, if you look at Jolani's alliances, many of the groups that are with him in Iraq, in Syria, they are far more extreme than he is, including those many thousands of fighters that come from China, many thousands who come from Central Asia, and even a few hundred are from Iran, extremists from our country. So these groups, many of them are far more extreme than Jolani himself. And controlling these different factions and these different groups is virtually impossible. He does not have all that much control. He himself is of course an extremist. If he tries to hold them back, they could turn their guns on him and the supporters around him. So it's a very, very horrible situation. In all, it's believed that since December the 8th, at least 10,000 people have been killed. Many of them are missing, but it's believed that almost all of those who are missing are dead.
What are the regional interests being played out here? Because we saw that the European Union finally made a comment on what's happening after ignoring it. However, the EU condemned the attacks by what they defined as pro-Assad elements. So effectively blaming the Alawites being murdered, despite, again, the internet now being flooded by videos of, also, well, pictures of women as well being executed. And obviously these are civilians. And so it's very strange to see not a single critical word about the government security forces murdering the Christians, Alawites, but instead they're suggesting this is the fault of themselves. At the same time, we suddenly saw this statement come out from the United States, and they condemned what they wrote, quote, the radical jihadi terrorists. So it looks like the EU and the Americans are quite split on this now, while the Gulf states appear to be suspiciously silent and uncritical of what has transpired. How do you see the different actors defining their interest? Because usually this is how it reflects in how much they care about human rights, I guess.
I think that if we look at how the EU was covering the genocide in Gaza, you can see striking similarities between the statement that was issued for this atrocity and the statements that were issued for Gaza. In Gaza, as the Israelis were slaughtering people, they blamed Hamas and its allies, and also gave these vague words, said some vague things about innocent civilians and so on. Here you saw the same pattern. First of all, they called these Assadists or Assad loyalists. Just because groups of people are resisting, that doesn't make them Assadists. They are being suppressed, they're being slaughtered, their lands are being taken, their homes are being taken, their jobs have been taken away from them. They are being humiliated regularly. They are being in official outlets being called people who are worthy of death and filth and other things because of their religious or their ethnic or their racial status. So I think it's quite natural that they would resist. And interestingly, those who carried out attacks on these HTS or the Al Qaeda troops under Jolani, they were not slaughtered. They went into the towns and cities and villages and began slaughtering ordinary people, as we see in the footage that these terrorists themselves put out. It's quite stunning. It's one thing to slaughter people, and another thing to willingly and happily take responsibility for it. It's, if someone, usually when people commit crimes, they hide those crimes. But here, ISIS and Al Qaeda, they behave like the Israelis behave in Gaza, where they show footage of their crimes. These people are doing the same thing. But the EU, what they did was first they tried to label the victims as the guilty party, and then they gave some vague words about civilians. The American position, which came very late, from my understanding, because I just saw it half an hour ago, is interesting. Regardless of the fact that the Americans don't name the Shia minority. But I think the fact that they did write a statement that is very critical of what the Jolani regime has done, is probably linked to Tulsi Gabbard's presence. I'm just guessing, it's pure speculation, and probably or possibly the vice president. But Tulsi Gabbard, we saw during her confirmation hearings how she spoke out against Al Qaeda, how she even alluded to the chemical attacks as being false flag operations carried out by Al Qaeda. She said this in front of the senators, U.S. senators. So, and we know that she met uh, former President Assad. She knows a thing or two about Syria. So I'm guessing that the U.S. statement has some. Her influence is the reason, and possibly the vice president's influence is the reason behind it. But I can't say for certain. It's pure speculation. But I think the divide between the United States and Europe is there's, at least on Syria, is quite similar, as of course I'm sure you know, to the divide on Ukraine now. I think this is. I think you can sort of see a continuation of the division that has now been brought about between the two sides. But of course, with regards to Israel and the Israeli regime and what it does, I think that that harmony still exists.
Yeah, you're probably correct about your assessment of Tulsi Gabbard because, well, she was often smeared. Well, before she took now the position as U.S. Director of National Intelligence, she was always smeared as being a toady for Assad because she did recognize that a key fault or weakness of the American government was exactly that they were financing a lot of these extremist terrorist groups, which would be which are to topple Assad, which would then end up in some horrible massacres, such as what we're seeing now. So the fact that she's now elevated.
Revolutionary salute to our brother Lunch Break Chronicles for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute to you.
From a smeared outsider to having this key position, it's definitely probably has a key role, and you're very correct. It does reflect a little bit what's happening in Ukraine as well, where the Americans are calling for a quick end to the war. By the way, also increasing amount of Ukrainian, not just civilians, but on the political leadership as well, while the EU keeps calling for war. It's very extraordinary because the EU was always sold as a peace project. It was going to be a different kind of power, a civilian power, a normative power, one who would elevate security by promoting good values and norms. And now it's very strange to see what has happened. I wanted to ask just how do you see this developing further, though? Because again, all this killing of Shiites, Alawites, Christians, how will this escalate? Surely there must be some resistance brewing within Syria, or do you see some, besides domestic uprising, do you see some foreign involvement coming to their aid, or will it be a bit like Gaza, where they will just be slaughtered in front of the cameras of the world?
It's very difficult to say. When we had a previous discussion together, I was of the view that the Jolani regime will not last very long. I don't think that Turkey and Qatar will benefit from the overthrow of the Assad government. Iran, of course, as I said earlier, supported the government, not because Iran felt that it was a fantastic and utopian state, but because the alternative was much worse, and also because the Syrian government supported the Palestinian cause. They were the only government left. All the governments, the Arab governments, are authoritarian. The Syrian government was just the exception to the rule with regards to the Palestinian people. So that was a second reason. But Syria had become a burden to Iran, or especially in the last 3-4 years, because before that, ISIS and Al Qaeda, which were first of all much more powerful, and since 2011 until 2017-18, they were a very powerful force, and the region was mobilized. Hezbollah, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, in Syria, Palestinian groups in Syria, they were all mobilized to fight against ISIS and Al Qaeda. And I would compare the ISIS and Al Qaeda back in.
Revolutionary salute to our Queen Yaya's kids for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, Queen. Salute to you.
Then to cancer, whereas what we now have in Syria is more like corona. It is a weakened entity, though with the same crude takfiri ideology, which believes people can be killed just because they think of it differently from the terrorists or the groups that are in charge. But back then, Iran supported them because it was so dangerous. But Iraq was about to fall, Lebanon would have fallen, and then ISIS would have been at our doorstep. It would have been on our border. In addition to that, though, the Syrian government was facilitating Iran's support for the resistance. It was facilitating Iran's support to Lebanon, to the West Bank, and also through sea, I suppose, to Gaza. I think Iran's support to Gaza goes through many different channels, and I obviously don't know what they are, but I'm guessing that one of those many channels may have been through Syria as well. But that's speculation on my part. So Iran did, while it was, there was a burden, it did also benefit from the existence of the Syrian government. But during the last 3-4 years, after former President Assad, improved his relations with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, he tilted away from Iran, and under their pressure, he discontinued cooperation with Iran to a large degree to help the resistance. And during the last 3-4 years, it was very difficult for Iran to cooperate with Syria on that front. So Iran was helping Syria. Iran was providing it with free fuel and other resources like the Russians, but it wasn't benefiting. And so basically Syria became a burden. That burden, that financial burden, has been removed from Iran's shoulders and Russian shoulders and Iraqi shoulders, and possibly, I think, a bit Algeria as well. I think the Algerians were helping the previous government a bit as well, although their capabilities are limited. Now the burden is on Turkey. It is on Qatar, and the sanctions haven't been removed. So the cost of Syria today, which is in which the situation inside the country, where the situation inside the country is far worse than it was even during the last years of the Assad government. It was going downhill back then, but after the collapse, the bureaucracy collapsed, Iranian, Russian support discontinued, the chaos. We saw chaos across the country, and then the Israeli regime began to bomb the country's infrastructure from north to south. And these terrorist groups, they murdered the men who were manning the air defense systems, which I find to be extraordinary. So not only did the Israelis bomb them, but these people destroyed the people who were manning the systems. So Syria today is much worse, and I don't think that the Saudis and Qatar are capable of filling the gap and of improving the lives of people. It's only going to be a burden for them, and Glenn, let me put it very, let me be very blunt. Iran, Hezbollah have been vindicated. Everything that we were fearful of happening happened. Although, as I said, if it had happened in the previous decade, it would be much worse than what we're seeing now, because these groups were much more powerful. But I think people now see what Turkey and Qatar and many others were supporting. This is the culmination. This is the success of Operation Timber Sycamore. This is what we have. This is the direct result of that operation that was initiated by Obama and the CIA. But again, I don't think that Qatar and Turkey will succeed. I think that ultimately, I don't know when, Jolani will fall. Hopefully, there will be a new, in the coming months, years, there will be a new leadership which respects the Druze, the Christians, the different Muslim sects, and can bring the country back together, because that's been the tradition of Syria for hundreds, if not thousands of years. That land, it wasn't a utopia, but the very fact that these minorities, that the Kurds, all of them, existed side by side, and until now, means that historically that land was more tolerant than it is today. The authorities.
You mentioned Israel and its role in this, but how do you see, or how are you reading Israel's wider role? Because I just saw that the Israeli foreign minister went out and condemned the brutality and the massacres by Jolani's government, which is strange that Israel can recognize this, but the European Union still feels like they have to provide cover. But the EU side, this is of course one can point out the hypocrisy given the brutality that Israel is engaged in, but also the fact that Israel has invaded and occupied large parts of Syrian territory. But on the other side, on the Syrian side of the border, we see that Jolani and his government has been very reluctant to be critical of Israel at all, while Israel now goes out and criticizes Jolani. They have, bombed some of the military facilities. So how do you explain this very strange relationship?
I think the Israeli regime has one objective and one objective only, and that is the Balkanization of Syria. And what it wants to do is to divide the Alawites, the Christians, the Druze, the Kurds, and to destroy Syrian national identity, and to create these small mini states which are all unstable and constantly at each other's throats, so that the Israeli regime can rule supreme. That's how they function in Lebanon as well. And I think that this is a major danger. And that also could be one reason behind the American statement. I think the influence of Tulsi Gabbard is definitely there. That's my guess, of course. But I also think perhaps some people who in the U.S. government who went along with this may have also been calculating that the Balkanization of Syria would be a good thing for the United States, because it would be a good thing for Israel. None of this is good for the United States, by the way. Nothing. None of the genocide in Gaza, the Holocaust in Gaza, the slaughter in Lebanon, or none of this is good for the United States. But the United States has sacrificed its own interests for the sake of the Israeli regime. In my opinion, the Israeli regime is a burden to the United States. What its status during the Cold War, debatable. But in my opinion, right now, it's just a liability. But the United States and the Europeans will accept that. So I think there's no doubt that the Israelis are not sincere. Initially, I think that Netanyahu, the reason after the fall of the Assad government, I think Netanyahu He invaded large parts of Syria because of it for his own self-interest, because he wanted to show himself as strong and victorious, to keep his coalition together, to stay in power. The same logic that lied behind what he did to Lebanon, the genocide in Gaza. I think all of this is linked to Netanyahu's personal self-interest. But I think what he did inadvertently, how should I put it without not seeming, not sounding ugly, but inadvertently he strengthened the resistance because his troops are more overstretched than before, but B, far more importantly, he showed that the new status quo, he exposed the new status quo as being, as you pointed out, ineffective against the Israeli regime, unwilling to stand up to the Israeli regime. Jolani and his Al-Qaeda and ISIS were quite willing to behead people on the streets, to slaughter people, as we saw again yesterday and the day before, but he's unwilling to take a stand against Israeli occupation of huge swathes of territory in the south. And I think that was a major mistake. So what they did was they strengthened what they vindicate. As I was saying earlier, he helped vindicate the resistance. And I think the continued actions of Jolani, Turkey, well, Erdogan, because I think I know many in Turkey are completely opposed to Erdogan's policies in Syria for the last decade and a half. But the resistance has been vindicated. Remember, and I'm sure you do, Hezbollah was, and Iran, of course, but Hezbollah was heavily demonized by many Sunnis in the Arab world in particular because of the anti-Hezbollah propaganda, that they were killing Sunnis in Syria, and all these oil and gas-rich dictatorships, they were the ones that were fueling this sectarianism. After what we saw in Gaza and the fact that Hezbollah took huge hits and made huge sacrifices for the people of Gaza, whereas no one else did anything, and neither did Jolani and his people. But now people are seeing what's happening in Syria. And I think probably you too see what I'm seeing. The mood in much of the world has shifted towards Hezbollah and has even shifted with regard to Syria. If you go and look at what many of our friends and many people who've been highly critical of the Israeli regime during the past year and a half, and who've been pounding the regime over the year and a half, many of these people in the previous decade were basically repeating the American narrative on Syria. And a lot of our friends, I won't name them, I mean, when they saw reality, they had the intellectual courage and honesty to shift their position. So today, Hezbollah is seen in a very different light. Today, Ansarullah in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas, the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Force. When the ceasefire in Gaza started, Abu Ubaidah thanked them and no one else. Of course, he thanked Iran as well, but he didn't thank Jolani or any of these terrorist groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or any of their affiliates. So I think in a sense, all these events, although tragic and very disturbing in Syria, in Gaza, and in Lebanon, they have changed the popular mood, both with regards to the Israeli regime, but also with regards to this horrific project that the West initiated in Syria, Occupation Timber Sycamore. People now, many more people than ever before, see what's going on in Syria in a very different light. Just like Ukraine. A couple of years ago, I would say that most elites in Iran were deeply influenced. I can't say most elites, but maybe most, many at least, were influenced by Western narratives on Ukraine. But now that has changed, it has gradually shifted. And I think you see the same in Syria, you see the same in Gaza and in Palestine, you see the same in Yemen. Yemen was very unpopular in the Arab world. People sided, thanks to the media, and Al Jazeera supported the Saudi attack and genocide in Yemen. People sided with the Saudis. But now Ansarullah is a household name across the Arab world. Of course, I should point out that Al Jazeera supported, and so did Turkey. They supported the Saudis, but then later, when the differences between Saudi Arabia and Qatar increased, and then which subsequently led to the blockade, the position of Al Jazeera shifted. But during the first few years, there was a unanimous. The Arabic media was almost unanimous in its hostility towards Ansarullah. So, sorry for rambling. The point that I'm trying to make is that views have shifted. Many people have died. Many people have been slaughtered, whether in Lebanon or in Yemen or in Gaza or in the West Bank or in Syria. But I think people are much more understanding of what's really going on today than before.
I think you're definitely correct on this, because I also get the impression that the narratives which were built have begun to break down. I just want to ask as a final question is if you have any predictions. Do you still see Jolani's government as being not doomed but destined to fail over the foreseeable future? And do you see a clash between his government and Israel, possibility of Lebanon or Iraq being pulled into this? How would you, again, I always point out nobody likes to look in a crystal ball because it's too many variables to make any clear predictions. But if not make prediction, what do you think are possible risks or directions we might be heading, at least?
I don't think he's going to last very long. I don't know if that means months or a year or two, but I don't think he's going to last very long. And I don't see him standing up to Syria. The only people he's going to stand up to, in my opinion, is women and children. His henchmen will continue to kill them, and some people, sadly, because of sectarianism or the fact that they don't want to accept that they made a mistake, or because of propaganda coming from oil and gas-rich dictatorships in the Persian Gulf and the Turkish government, they will continue to back these terrorists. But I think most people by now really know what's going on, and I don't think that his government is effective. They will not be able to manage. This is a state. This is Syria is a civilization. It's been around for thousands of years. It's one of the oldest civilizations that land, Sham, on the planet. And Syria today, like any other country, has a sophisticated people. There's the issue of healthcare, higher education, schooling. Cities need to be managed. These terrorists have no capability. They have no understanding of how to run a government, and they're far more extreme than what we see in Afghanistan. So I don't think that they're going to last. I think there will be bloodletting. I think a lot of blood will be spilled, but I don't think they will last. Hypothetically speaking, the only entity that would support Syria in any confrontation with the Israeli regime is the axis of resistance. Turkey sells Baku oil to Israel, a discount, cheap oil, and the oil from Syria Kurdistan that the Americans are still stealing, it goes through Turkey and to Israel, from my understanding. So Turkey has no real problem with the Israeli regime. They're doing business as usual. Turkey, Jordan, under current management, under current management, they're not going to help Syria against the Israelis. So if Jolani ever wants to contemplate taking back Syrian territory, which I am not quite sure he's thinking about that seriously, he would have to turn to the resistance. But after slaughtering all these women and children, I think he's gone too far, way too far.
I agree. Anyways, Professor Marandi, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So
Group after group of the armed forces of Ukraine, in a state of low morale, began to surrender en masse. Even Russian troops began to take them prisoner en masse, following the collapse of the Kursk front. Videos began to go viral on the internet on March 10, 2025, showing a new wave of Ukrainian invading troops and foreign mercenaries surrendering en masse in the last 2 days, realizing that the situation was becoming increasingly hopeless, and they preferred to become Russian prisoners of war rather than cannon fodder for Zelensky. The Kursk front changed at lightning speed, showing the results of the work of the Russian armed forces by liberating several settlements in the sector, turning into a massive defeat for Ukraine with heavy losses in human resources and equipment. Since the start of hostilities in Kursk, 66,270 soldiers have been killed, according to the Russian Defense Ministry as of March 10. Now, the Ukrainian front in the northern sector has been surrounded, which has determined the fate of more than 1,500 soldiers, including foreign mercenaries. Another group of prisoners voluntarily surrendered to Russian troops from Ivashkovsky, located north of Sudza, which was liberated by the 30th Regiment. A group of 8 Ukrainian soldiers who had just arrived in Kursk, guided by a Russian reconnaissance drone, were then taken to the Russian detention zone for interrogation. The commander demanded one thing: to survive, but to no avail. Most of the prisoners of war said that they had not communicated with their wives and children for a year, because the Kiev regime forbade and confiscated their mobile phones. Meanwhile, the infographic shows the Russian military inspecting the destroyed positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, near Nikolaevka and Staraya Sorochina, where about a dozen Ukrainian soldiers were found dead, as shown in a video released by the Russian military correspondent on March 10. Swastikas, runes, Nazi and pagan slogans in Ukrainians and English. All of this was found in the homes of civilians in the settlements liberated from Ukraine. Ukrainian troops and foreign mercenaries set up firing positions there, the Russian military reported. In addition, a captured Ukrainian prisoner thanked the Russian servicemen for not finishing him off. He came to the front line from the prison where he spent 22 years and began to tell everything.
Пів-8 ранку. Завезли в Старичів, зробили з мене воєнного. Сам я заключений.
Заключенный?
Да, я сидевший, я 22 года отсидел. Вот. Меня забрали насильно, не спрашивали, хочу я воевать, че не хочу, заставили. И я пошел. И вот оконцовка, я оказался у вас. Вот так скинули. Я первый раз вообще...
Man was in prison. Man sitting in prison doing 22 years. They drag him out of prison. Send him to the front line. See, CNN, they criminals. They should be reporting on this. Man, fingers done got blown off. He happy and thanking the Russians. Thank you for not killing me. Look what Zelensky doing, dragging prisoners out of the prison. It's either die by the hands of the prison guards or go die by the hands of the Russians. That's crazy.
Попав з кидами пораненими. Ваші хлопці не дали мені допомогу. По-людськи віднеслися, води дали. Зараз мені ще допомогу дадуть. Що такі люди? Ви все є люди. Я вам дуже вдячний за ваше людське розуміння. Не те, що там говорять. Що ви там
оказали? Помощь тебе оказали?
Ну, укололи меня, ну, там все печально очень. Там пальцы оторваны. Кость ну, короче.
Помощь оказали теперь?
Ну, первый, да, оказали, укололи меня, обмотали.
Воды дали тебе?
Воды дали, все дали, сигареты дали.
Вели нормально, никто ничего тебе?
Не, меня не били, мне ничего по-человечески, все. Ну, вот, дай Бог вам здоровья и самого наикращего.
Кому ты приписан? 66-й, да?
Да, я 66-й в бригаде. А что оно, как оно? Ну, вот так и закинули нас ночью.
РР у вас 66-я, да?
А?
66-я РР? Разведрота?
Да. И вот мы приехали ночью, пол-четвертого, и сразу нас скидом сбили. Разбивали. Нас было 4, троих убило, а я с Божьей помощью выжил.
С бросами, да?
Да. Вот, и до вас я добрався, і ви мені допомогли, надали допомогу, дай Бог. І в подальшому думаю, що все буде саме найліпшого.
Благодарю черную маму за то, что ты спасли.
Благодарю чорну маму, що спасли, не добили, що я жив, здоровий. Дай Бог вам здоров'я.
Давай, мужик, теперь будешь жить, не переживай.
Все нормально будет, не переживай, да.
It's gonna get worse. Because Zelensky and Mexico, NATO over them.
A few hours ago, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation held a press briefing for journalists, where representatives of the Defense Department commented on the events taking place in the Special Military Operation Zone. In particular, the chief of the Department of Information and Mass Communications of the Russian Ministry of Defense, Lieutenant General Igor Konashenkov, officially confirmed the Russian army's serious successes in the Kursk region and Kurakovo direction of the front. He stated that the information regarding the liberation of the settlement of Constantinople, in the Kurakovo direction of the front, is accurate. It is reported that this settlement was liberated on the morning of March 8 by soldiers of the units of the groups of troops under the designation Vostok. Commenting on the liberation of Constantinople, the authoritative war correspondent Yuri Kotnak noted the rather rapid pace of the Russian army's advance in this direction of the front. According to him, the war correspondents were surprised by how quickly the Russian army forced the Ukrainian troops to abandon their positions in Constantinople and flee towards settlements such as Bogodar and Alexivka. All this indicates that the morale of the Ukrainian soldiers is almost completely broken, and their desire to continue fighting is nullified. Currently, as of March 10, 2025, Russian troops are attacking the Ukrainian army's positions in settlements such as Razliv, Bogodar, and Alexivka. According to war correspondents, the Ukrainian army's defense in these settlements is literally bursting at the seams. Against this backdrop, even many Western experts and analysts with pro-Ukrainian views express confidence that the transition of these settlements under the Russian army's control may take place in the coming days. Thus, judging by this map, it is safe to assume that the Russian army is approaching the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region with a wide front, and that hostilities will soon begin in the central part of Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry also commented on the current situation in the Kursk region. In particular, the Russian military officially confirmed the liberation of the Lebedevka settlement in the Kursk region and the Novonkoi settlement in the Sumy region. Moreover, on the evening of March 9, war correspondents and numerous sources in the Russian Defense Ministry also confirmed the liberation of settlements such as Kazakylaknya and Cherkaskoy Porknoy, north of Sudza. Over the past 24 hours, the situation of the Ukrainian army has also rapidly deteriorated in the settlement of Malaya Laknya. As it turned out, on the morning of March 9, the Russian units of the groups of troops under the designation Sever managed to completely surround this settlement. However, the Ukrainian army units located in Malaya Laknya refused to surrender. Apparently, they hoped that the Ukrainian High Military Command would try to save them by unblocking the escape routes. And only by the evening of March 9, realizing that the Ukrainian command did not care about them, the Ukrainian army units stationed in Malaya Laknya chose to lay down their arms and surrender voluntarily. Thus, the Russian army completely liberated the entire territory of the Kursk region, north of Sudza. Thus, the line of defense of the Ukrainian army has almost completely shifted to the city of Sudza. As for Sudza, it is worth noting that the situation of the Ukrainian grouping in this city also continues to deteriorate rapidly. After the breakthrough of Russian troops in this area, war correspondents began to record fierce fighting not only in the eastern part of Sudza, but also in the northern part of this city. According to a fighter from one of the units of Spetsnaz Akhmat, after Russian troops broke into the city of Sudza through an underground gas pipeline and struck the Ukrainian army's back, the Russian army's capabilities increased significantly in the Kursk region. According to him, if earlier the Russian command planned to simply squeeze enemy forces out of the Kursk Oblast during the offensive, now the Russian army is faced with the task of completely encircling and destroying the Ukrainian grouping in this Russian region. At the same time, he added that in the last 10 hours alone, Russian troops had destroyed hundreds of enemy military equipment and taken 120 Ukrainian soldiers as prisoners. We will not allow these fascists to escape from Kursk. They will either all surrender or be destroyed, the Russian fighter said. The video released by the Russian military, which clearly shows footage of the destruction of a large enemy military column during its attempt to flee the city of Sudza, once again emphasizes to the Ukrainian General Staff and its NATO military advisors that Russian troops are not going to let the Ukrainian army and NATO forces escape from Kursk without consequences. The footage clearly shows how Ukrainian and NATO forces try to escape from the northern part of the city of Sudza under the cover of night. However, the bridge destroyed by a Russian ballistic missile did not allow them to do this. The footage shows how the military column stopped near the destroyed bridge. Immediately after that, a missile attack was launched on this area using Tornado-S multiple launch rocket systems. As a result, the entire enemy column, along with the manpower, was completely destroyed. Later, the Russian military said that as a result of this missile attack, 8 units of heavy equipment, 50 Ukrainian soldiers, and 20 foreign mercenaries were destroyed. It is reported that they were British, French, and Canadian citizens. Meanwhile, insiders in Kiev said that the political clown Volodymyr Zelensky does not intend to order the withdrawal of troops from the territory of the Kursk region, even despite the critical situation for the Ukrainian army. It is reported that Zelensky was hysterical when he found out about the breakthrough of Russian troops in the Kursk region. Insiders have confirmed that this dead man walking ordered General Syrsky to hold Sudza at any cost. However, Ukrainian officers and soldiers are already refusing to obey Kiev. Currently, they are trying to escape from Kursk to save their own lives. Against this backdrop, on March 9th, US President Donald Trump made a statement that shocked the whole of Ukraine. In particular, during an interview with American journalists from Fox News, Donald Trump admitted that Ukraine would not survive, even if the United States resumed military assistance to Kiev. Thus, the current owner of the White House acknowledged that Ukraine's fate is predetermined, and that the Russian Federation will most likely absorb this Eastern European country.
Everyone, it's your host Danny Haifong, and as you can see, I am joined by Pepe Escobar, geopolitical analyst and journalist of many different publications, The Cradle, the UN's Review, so many more. Pepe, good to be back with you.
Wonderful to be back with you and all of you, our audience. Greetings from ASEAN, which not many people in the Trump administration know what it is, and BRICS partner, Thailand.
Great. Well, thanks for taking your evening out with me, Pepe. Let's get started. Everybody, hit the like button as you come on the stream. That helps boost this in YouTube's algorithm. And you can find all of Pepe's work in the video description below. But let's get started. So, Pepe, let us first talk about Kursk, because the news has been that Russian special forces made a major breakthrough in an operation that involved moving through a gas pipeline to ambush Ukrainian troops. And
the official name then is Dash Through the Pipeline. How cool is that?
It's incredible. Well, what's incredible about it now is that, as Dmitry Medvedev has said, is that this cauldron is rapidly coming to a close. And I wanted your assessment of, one, what's going on in Kursk and how is it going to shape things from here? Because we're hearing leaks from the Trump administration that Ukraine aid is not going to be turned back on during these talks. So your assessment of what's going on in the conflict as Kursk, Russia goes on the counteroffensive.
Well, this operation in Kursk was absolutely extraordinary. It's essentially the Chechen Spetsnaz, in fact. And there's a video that surfaced of Commander Apti explaining to his absolutely top of the line commandos how this was going to develop. And they published the video between yesterday and today. So this was a very carefully planned operation, brilliantly executed, of course. And let's say it's the cherry on the cake of the imminent cauldron in Kursk. In fact, the cauldron is already on. And the fact that it has been officially dismissed by the Ukrainians means that the cauldron is already on. But this is one extra element of what's happening on the ground in Kursk. And of course, in the front line in Donbass is much, much more complicated. Basically, this let's say this the American positioning of being not even leading from behind, which is what it amounts to, it's an extra incentive for Russia to accelerate everything going on in the different nodes of the battlefield. And in terms of morale, all the morale is with advancing Russian forces and Donbass militias. And of course, on the other side, it's a debacle, almost completely, and all along the front lines. This can last weeks or months. And don't forget that this will proceed parallel to the, let's say, theoretical beginning of the negotiations, which are not the negotiations exclusively about the proxy war in Ukraine, now defined by Marco Rubio himself. Let's see if these initial steps of normalizing diplomatic relations between Russia and the US, the second stage, which is the most complicated of them all, is to install a measure of trust so they can start discussing the big picture. And one of the nodes of the big picture is a solution to Ukraine. So this is not about Ukraine per se. The fact that this Tuesday, for instance, there's going to be a US-Ukraine crucial discussion about Ukraine. By the way, the sweaty sweatshirt will not be there. He decided to go to Saudi Arabia to meet MBS, as if MBS is a mediator in the proxy war in Ukraine. What is absolutely obvious for everybody in the US and all across the global north, including the dead-on-arrival global north and the global south, is that Zelensky is a dead man walking. For how long, that nobody knows for sure. But obviously, the Trump administration doesn't want to deal with him anymore. The thing is how the mechanism is going to be articulated in terms of new elections, how soon. Of course, the Americans, the Brits are already courting their candidates, even the Europeans, by the way, the ones who are on the menu, not on the table. So there are a lot of variables there. For the moment, they are all disconnected, and we don't see an overarching organization of how this thing is going to proceed. There are too many loose ends. But there is already, we can see a trajectory ahead of us. And the trajectory points to, in many aspects, what even the greatest diplomat of our time, Sergei Lavrov, has been saying for months, in fact, almost a year. This will be decided in the battlefield. Yes, each day that passes, the solution will be in the battlefield, or the different solutions will be in the battlefield. And the battlefield predominates over the US-Russia negotiations. So once again, I think it's important to remind ourselves, all of us, that we are in the very first stage, very far away from any possible decision on anything. But you know, the key nodes are already there, and we can see where this, I would not say high-speed rail, it's a very slow train for the moment, where the slow train is going.
Well, the Western media has sounded the alarm. NATO, the EU, everyone is sounding the alarm about Kursk because it comes as U.S. intel, as well as some of the aid. Starlink is still going, for example, but some of the much of the aid has temporarily shut down, as the Trump administration frames it. But a whopping 80% of this audience here, Pepe, believes that this conflict actually is not going to be settled at the table, as you said, that it will actually be settled on the battlefield. How much of what's happening in Kursk indicates this? Because I think it took many by surprise that there was such a massive surge by Russia at this moment, where much of the talk has been about talk?
Well, I think you pointed your finger to the right, the right concept. Talk. The Americans, the Ukrainians, the Brits, the Europeans, they talk all the time, non-stop. It's unbearable, in fact. What do the Russians do? They don't talk. They act on the ground. And that's the whole difference. While everybody was talking, the Russians were planning an offensive in Kursk. And we are right in the middle of it. The numbers vary, but at least 66,000 Ukrainian fighters, soldiers, recruitees, or whatever have already been exterminated. And there are another 10 to 20,000 on the list. Basically, now it's surrender or die in stark terms. And that's it. Instead of talking, you act, which is a mirror of the US-China relationship. While the Americans are starting with the previous crash test dummy administration, talking about punishing China, isolating China, containing China, and all that. China acts. And now Made in China 2025, which is, I was writing a column this morning about the success of Made in China 2025, as it was shown during the 2 sessions in Beijing last week. It's very simple. It's 2 5-year plans in one. Subsequent, this whole thing was conceptualized in 2015. Now we are 2025. You reap the benefits of what you planned 10 years before. And in the case of Russia, they are reaping the benefits of what they had planned after a series of setbacks during the SMO, what they started to plan last year after the incursion against Kursk. And they started to plan how they were going to retake Kursk and how they were going to advance in Donbass. That's what's happening right now. Until we get to the point which was explained, I would like to repeat that because it's very, very important. One of the commanders of the Donbass, when I was in Donbass less than a month ago, he said, look, we are all waiting for the order. Order means the big guy up there saying, go all the way, non-stop. We might be approaching that moment. Might. It's quite possible. Not now. Maybe in a matter of 2 to 3 months, depending on how quick Kursk will be, let's say, reliberated, and the advances to the west, to Dnipro, Petrovsk, towards Petrov, you name it. And then maybe this order will come before, by the end of spring, for instance, or even before summer. But we are approaching this moment very, very fast. And if that happens, it's going to be, I would say, layers and layers in advance of what will be discussed at the table by the time. Because these negotiations on the table are going to be extremely complex, especially because there's the number one point of the whole thing. The Trump administration simply cannot concede that this is a strategic defeat of the US and NATO. This is something like an asteroid impacting on Earth. You know, they can. How they're going to find a way out that frames this as a sort of draw. Yeah. So this is the key point, and I think our audience, everybody agrees with that.
Well, that's what we've gotten so far, is framing this as a stalemate. You hear Elon Musk all over X talking about this as a bloody, bloody, bloody stalemate. And then even Bloomberg, which goes along with how Donald Trump has been speaking about this conflict, reported misinformation in my assessment, but I'm curious on your thoughts, that Vladimir Putin has agreed that Russia would be willing to take a ceasefire with the caveat on his terms. So I want your reaction to that, because Kursk, what just happened in Kursk and what is going to continue happening in Kursk, seems to be an indication that that's not the case at all. But yet we're hearing ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire coming out of Trump and now the Western media. So what's your
once
take?
again, Danny? Once again, it's talk. It's deafening, and we have to deal with it every day professionally. It's Putin never said that he would consider a ceasefire. No way. And this is the official position of the Russian government. Everybody. And it's always repeated by the Minister of Foreign Affairs in a very, because they have such outstanding diplomats, in a very diplomatic way. No, the ceasefire, if it will happen, will have to be inbuilt in a much, much larger discussion negotiation. We haven't even started the negotiation yet. How can you start talking about a ceasefire? No way. It's not going to happen. Once again, this is American mainstream media fabricating outcomes and, of course, trying to impose a narrative, especially in terms of controlling not only domestic public opinion, but also international public opinion.
Yeah. Well, there's just been a lot of debate about what terms Russia will take. But what we do know, Pepe, and you've written an article about this, is that while the United States right now is talking about coming to a peace settlement and getting Zelensky on board, you have Europe talking about fighting to the last Ukrainian, essentially, and trying to militarize exponentially in order to keep this war going. Talk about this, because what we continue to see on the battlefield in Kursk is that Russia is going to get what it wants.
Exactly.
Talk about what Europe is going to do, and I know you wrote about this, and I can share the article around. So
please share the article, because I try to make it with a little bit of sense of humor, because when we have, in our case, we have to deal with this 24/7. The only way is to try to mock these idiots. At least we have a little bit of a respite. Well, let's say that they are being very successful in setting up the coalition of the ones who want to die, to put it mildly, the coalition of the willing to die. Because this is what's going to be. Assuming we have any of the variations that were voiced this past few days by Le Petit Roi in Paris, by the Germans, by Starmer, by reformed NATO generals, unreformed crypto NATO generals, acting general, whatever. This is good. These people, if they face a battlefield like what's happening in the Novorossiya, 1,000 kilometers long, they will be incinerated in 5 minutes. Simple as that. Can you imagine that non-existent German army, or that bunch of cage au fall of the French army facing battle-hardened Russians, Chechen commandos, etc., on the battlefield? Come on, it doesn't even qualify as a joke. So they don't have the soldiers, they don't have the armies, they don't have the weapons, which they'll have to buy all over again from the US because they are demilitarized. So what do they have once again? I think this is becoming the theme of our conversation, Danny. Talk, non-stop. Or, the Chihuahuas they are, yapping non-stop. Can you imagine that you have the head of the European Commission saying that we need 800 billion euros that nobody has to rearm Europe? But this is something so out of sight, if there was a psychedelic element to it, at least we could dance to it, But no, there's nothing. It's megalomania based on absolutely nothing. Even if there was the beginning of a rearmament, all these countries were already in major trouble economically, they will never have the funds to finance all that. Or if they got the funds, will be with extortionate interest by the usual international financial system vultures. You know who they are by name, all of you, I'm sure. So this was going nowhere. And what France and Starmer and the UK proposed so far, you know, boots on the ground, planes in the air and all that, this is talk. They don't have those boots and they don't have those planes, period. Same with the French, same thing. In France, obviously, people are so over the top fed up with Macron that they don't even pay attention to it anymore. You have 2 or 3 people who actually go on those talk shows in France and say and try to say that this is completely absurd. But most people, they don't even care anymore because they know that it doesn't mean anything, especially coming from a president with the approval rating of a bunch of mosquitoes. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So the dichotomy between the rational actors on one side, what is Russia is doing on the battlefield, what might be the beginning of a rational dialogue between the US and Americans on one side, compared to this motley crew of absolute imbeciles all across the European space is stark. But stark for European citizens who still have control over their critical faculties. I was discussing this tonight with a brilliant businesswoman. She's German, but she's also Southeast Asian, very active in Southeast Asia, working for an enormous cabinet here in. And she's saying that the way the Germans have been brainwashed these past 1, 2, 3 generations is it's absolutely impossible to recover. She gave up on Germany, and she's German. She has 2 German passports. She gave up on Germany completely. But this is what? This is a businesswoman that travels between the East and West, that deals with rational people, Zach, that when she is in Asia, she can have a conversation like we are having here now with our audience, which is absolutely impossible to have in Europe, this kind of conversation. It's out of the question, especially in Germany, UK, and France. It's no wonder.
I wanted to get your final comments before moving on to some broader issues, Pepe. I don't know if you saw the Starlink and former Polish foreign minister
oh my
debate.
God, that's a major imbecile. Jesus, that takes the cake. Yes.
So Radoslaw Sikorski, who is, you know, within the European Union Parliament, he was a former foreign minister of Poland. He is noted for saying "Thank you, USA" on X, and I can't pull it up because X is down right now. But famous post where he said "Thank you, USA."
So X is down in the US. Here is apparently still working in Asia.
It's down. It's down here. I don't know why, but he is famously noted for going onto Twitter after Nord Stream was destroyed.
The famous tweeter with Nord Stream said, "Thank you, America," right?
Yeah. So he got very angry at Elon Musk for suggesting that if Starlink was pulled, that Ukraine would collapse very quickly. Now, I want your comment on this. Starlink is still being provided, and Elon Musk and Marco Rubio both came down and said, we are always going to provide this. How does this factor in to this overall conversation, this debate about Starlink, to Ukraine's battlefield chances, and just what we're seeing in these changes between the United States and Russia?
Well, Elon Musk is a businessman. If he has a deal to supply whoever that is with Starlink, he's not going to destroy the deal. Obviously not, as much as he would like to. And in fact, some of his tweets, X's, let's put it this way, strongly suggest that he would love to do it, but he won't. It's a sound business decision. Assuming this would happen, the collapse that we're watching now would be even more accelerated. So the Russians, when they look at it from the outside, they say, we don't even need disabling Starlink for the Ukrainians. We are doing it our way, the Russian way, on the battlefield, on those two fronts, in Kursk and in Donbass. So this is, in fact, this is a non-issue, in fact. The issue that is very, very serious and would warrant a serious debate, let's say, okay, going forward, is the fact that Starlink is used by governments and by armies in a, I would say, an extremely dodgy way, any way you want to look at it. So Musk has a disproportionate power now of supplying Starlink to several governments and governmental bodies and armies, etc. And he is with Starlink, he's directly influencing geopolitics, but directly, as if he is by himself, a geopolitical actor. This requires serious examination. We're not going to have this right now, but in the short, medium term, and the long run, this can pose a lot of problems for a lot of people and for a lot of governments and political bodies all across the world, especially across the global south.
So, Pepe, now I want to talk to you about this, some broader issues. Maybe we can hit on two. The first, let's talk about, prominent BRICS member Russia is very unhappy with what's happening in Syria. So Syria, there is just massacres happening, Tartus, Latakia, all across the coast by the HTS-led government. You see video of and images of Syrian civilians actually huddling inside of Hamima Russian military airbase.
Over 7,000 last
for protection. So talk about this in the context, there also is Donald Trump saying that the United States is stronger than Russia, Iran, and China put together as they start their naval exercises. What's your reaction to these developments, given that it is kind of this highlight of this unipolar, multipolar struggle worldwide?
I am immensely saddened by what's happening in Syria, although we could see it coming 3 months ago already, even before the fall of Aleppo, the fall of Damascus, and especially after the fall of Damascus. We are dealing with a bunch of bloody terrorists. That's it. You cannot escape it. You're not going to have reformed Salafi jihadis just because one of them now is the president. For instance, this Saturday, I almost fell on the floor because I was reading a hagiographic, coronation of Sarah at the Financial Times. An enormous, well, I read it online, but I assumed it was a full page coronation of Sarah, and whitewashing absolutely everything about him. So this is the tone in Western mainstream media. Obviously, just like Palestinians don't exist, victims, just like 14,000 plus people killed in Donbass since 2014 by the Ukrainians don't exist. These Alawites, Shiites, Christians, and even moderate Sunnis who have been killed these past few days, they also don't exist. And worse than that, much, much worse. I wish I could go really hardcore here, but families are watching us, right? So we have to be relatively well behaved. Those undescribable infrahumans at the European Union actually blame the victims for the killings that have been conducted this past few days by HTS mercenaries, other subgroups, infragroups linked to HTS. This galaxy of Salafi jihadis, ultra hardcore, including, very, very important, mercenaries from Chechnya, Uzbekistan, and Uyghurs from Xinjiang. All of this is beyond appalling, serious, absurd, and okay, a condemnation at UN Security Council sponsored by US and Russia. Okay, what's that gonna change? Nothing. The only thing that would change would be to get all these representatives of Greater Idlibistan, which is HTS and all these infra groups together. And you know what we should do with that. Huh? I think I don't need to get into detail. This will be the only solution. It's not going to happen. These people are actually protected by, I would say, most of the European governments directly. They are excused by a great deal of NATO stand and a great deal of European governments. So this is appalling, doesn't even begin to describe it. And Russia, of course, they are in an absolutely terrible position. First of all, now we have at least, last count of earlier today, 7,000 people who are basically camping inside Haimim Air Base. Completely nuts. The Russians simply they cannot feed all these people, house all these people, obviously. Although the Russian commander of the base said, look, we will protect women, children, etc. He made a commitment. But they need a supply line for that. These people simply cannot live inside the base for longer than what? A few days. What is the Russian government going to do about that? Seriously. For the moment, and this is a taboo, I prefer to tell you right now, straightforward, I really don't like the way Russian media is covering this. It gives me personally the impression, and I've been into this rodeo for 40 years, that they are trying to whitewash what's going on in Tartus, Latakia, and inside Hmymin. Obviously, because they have nothing to propose, and they know that this is, for the Russian government, this is a dead end. And there's nothing they can essentially do about it, apart from picking up a phone, calling Dara. What are you going to do about that? Otherwise, what? You're going to throw a bomb in Damascus? No, the Russians don't work this way. They are rational actors. But this is absolutely inevitable, considering the profile of all this horrible galaxy that was living inside Idlib and Greater Idlibistan. And then after the fall of Damascus, they are all over the place. And especially the use, which is extremely perverse, of mercenaries, which are not Arabs. These people are from the Caucasus or from Central Asia or from the deserts of Xinjiang, in fact, to kill moderate Arab Syrians. This is, it's totally absurd. It's totally absurd. And obviously, we have a little condemnation here and there from Russia and US. It's not enough, especially when we have the whole European West defending this guy or writing hagiographies in full pages in newspapers. Yes, I'm glad that you put it up now, Danny, the famous WikiLeaks. Yes, this is what Israel always wanted. Yes, what Israel always wanted is disaggregated, discombobulated, destroyed Syria, total divide and rule, incapable of controlling itself and mired in a situation of total civil war, which is what we are approaching very, very fast. And of course, with a bunch of terrorists, essentially, by any definition, controlling the political process, with one of them self-installed as president, and going directly after minorities, whoever they are. And they can be Alawites, they can be Druze, they can be Shiites, and they can be Sunnis as well, even though the majority of Syria is Sunni. But these are what? Moderate Sunnis, businessmen, tolerant Sunnis, relatively secular Sunnis. In the eyes of these Salafi jihadis, outside of the Arab world, they are infidels and they should be killed. And we have them saying it on camera. And you have them killing these people on camera. So it's absolutely revolting. And nothing's going to come out of it, Danny, unfortunately. Nothing. Maybe a stupid UN Security Council resolution. For what?
Yeah. And, given the situation in Syria, many might scoff at the idea that those in the multipolar world and the rising BRICS-led multipolar world need more security and need more coordinated security. Well, Russia, China, and Iran are holding their Security Belt 2025, where all of their navies are going to be participating this month of March. I wanted to ask you, Pepe, given this development, talk about what Donald Trump said. He said that he's not worried about this because the United States is stronger than all three of these countries, not just militarily, but just stronger than all three of these countries. So I think this can jump off a conversation about, what is actually going on and what explains the freak out about this, because this is an annual exercise, but there is a freak out about this every time.
It's an annual exercise. They have been doing it for a while, and they continue to do it. Obviously, a major freak out because these are the top three BRICS, essentially. Instead of the Primakov triangle with India, this is let's say the post-Primakov triangle with Iran instead of India. And these three are considered threats to the US. So obviously there is talk all over. Oh, wow, who they're going to invade next and all that. Forget it. Ridiculous. Can you imagine the other way around? What about those Baltic exercises, which they also have every year? And the Baltic exercises are avowedly anti-Russia and warmongerish exercises. Not a word. There you go. Once again.
Yeah. We'll talk about then what exactly, Donald Trump plays it off as, we're just stronger anyway. But what exactly is, given that all three of these players are in the conversation as to what the United States should do in terms of security about them, and that's why these exercises raise high alarm. What exactly is the fear then? Because if Donald Trump says it's not military, maybe he's wrong. I'm curious about what exactly is the fear coming from I guess you could say, the collective West establishments, including the United States, of these countries getting closer.
It's a PR thing, essentially, Danny. They see a very good opportunity to depict these three BRICS having a military exercise together as a threat. Simple. It's obviously people with IQ with room temperature will buy it right away. Oh yes, they are together over there in Oman, training to invade whatever parts of Europe, the Caucasus, Africa, maybe So it's so childish, the whole thing. But the only way, the only rational explanation for all this freak out, there is a major freak out, is that they have to transform it into a PR offensive to depict these three powers having a military exercise as a major threat. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. Especially when we know that these exercises are planned 1 year in advance, always. So everybody knew that there will be this a military exercise now. It's a non-issue, essentially. It's a non-issue.
Right. And talk about the the integration part of this, because the United States and Europe as a whole, they have been integrating, so to speak, up until the Trump administration, which is now forcing a different kind of integration onto Europe. But talk about what exactly is Russia, China, Iran integrating around, and how does this factor into the US's fear about Russia, China, and Iran? Because even under Trump, while there's talk about peace with Russia, there is still talk about deterrence against China and Iran. There's this, well, maybe we'll have nuclear negotiations, but also if they don't accept what we want, it could be very bad for Iran. So all three of them play into the U.S.'s national security priorities. So why exactly is this integration between the three so dangerous for the unipolar?
For the moment, it's not danger, but this is not, for instance, Shanghai Cooperation Organization military exercise with all the members of the SCO. Even the SCO is not configured as a sort of Asian NATO. So these three BRICS having military exercise, this doesn't mean this is an Asian NATO exercise. No way. They need better coordination between their military. It's part of interlocking strategic partnerships. Don't forget that all these three, they have strategic partnerships. One has with the other two. It's totally interlocked. They are linked by strategic partnerships. And that includes, of course, more military integration, like it was discussed, approved, and signed in the strategic partnership deal signed by Putin and Pezeshkian in January in Moscow. Simple as that. Can you imagine? Okay, and this is the current level of recall. Can you imagine if we had an SCO military drill with all the SCO members, including also India and Pakistan, the Central Asians, etc.? Then, wow, they would be running to their nuclear silos or refuge in New Zealand, all of them. The whole collective West will be, what?
Yeah. Well, you're in Eurasia now, Pepe.
It's like I'm more relaxed, Danny. I think you noticed that my tone is significantly different now. It's because I am here and I am relaxed. I am surrounded by rational, extremely well-educated, polite people. We can have serious geopolitical discussions with everybody. Thais, Chinese, Europeans who do the back and forth with Southeast Asia. It's you feel immediately that you are back to rationality in every sense. Not to mention, of course, all the hedonistic aspects of Thailand, which is one of the top destinations to live in the world. I lived everywhere in the world, and for me, Thailand is number one. There's no competition anywhere. So obviously, you when you look around the dementia in the West from this point of view here, it's even more absurd. And at the same time, there are very serious issues being discussed here. For instance, everybody was paying a lot of attention to the two sessions in China last week. Extremely important. All the intel services of the ASEAN countries. But it's different. China is the number one trade partner of all the ASEAN nations. So obviously they have to know everything that happens in China in detail. And here is an excellent crossroads to get first-class information about everything that is happening in China. And of course, the economy is doing well. You know, the baht, the currency is strong. Of course, they have a lot of debt, like everybody has across the global south. Just ask our friend, Professor Michael Hudson. But it's manageable. And at the same time, the Thais are particularly pleased that the whole planet makes a point of wanting to come here and live the Thai experience, which is, if we put it in diplomatic terms, is like Thailand was a gigantic Sergei Lavrov, you know, doing the best diplomacy possible, with, of course, with a Thai touch, smiles, you know, relaxed, best massage, you name it.
Pepe, I wanted you to actually talk about that rational side of integration more, in particular with these three BRICS, the three biggest BRICS, the most important, Russia, China, and Iran, because when we hear about these exercises, it's threat. You know, the Russia, China, Iran are a threat. But talk about this, because we have also the market going crazy right now because of China's retaliatory response to U.S. tariffs. Wall Street is not happy about this, but they're blaming China. They're saying China is making Americans hurt.
They put the tariffs and they blame China.
Yes. So talk about what are these three biggest BRICS doing at that rational level that, to me, is the reason why there's a freak out about anything that they do, including these military exercises. But what are they doing to prepare for this moment? Because as Syria demonstrates, even as Ukraine has demonstrated, these are very much unstable and chaotic times.
Well, once again, Syria, Danny, Iran and Russia were not prepared for what happened in Syria. And we can say with a measure of rationality, once again, that they are profoundly appalled by what's going on at the moment. There's not much they can do to alter the situation. This is terrible. And this is something that affects, I would say, the global south as a whole and BRICS as a whole. Syria could be a very important node of the new Silk Roads, of an integration of West Asia, which could be coordinated with BRICS and all that. And all that, for the moment and for at least the short, medium term, is shattered. It's totally shattered. We know who won, sort of, or, you know, who are not, at least who are not the losers with what's going on in Syria. And obviously this does not profit the global south or BRICS in any way. So let's say that the Russian government is still trying to find its bearings and how they're going to relate to this very, very extremely unstable and a Syria on the border of civil war, in fact. Same with Iran. Iran is not saying anything about it. There's deafening silence coming from Iran in terms of Syria. So it's very, very sad. I would not try to do a geopolitical treatise about it. And on a gut feeling for all of us, this is extremely sad, especially because it was so predictable. And what the Turks thought that they had in Syria, they don't. They don't control Syria. They don't control these demented specimens from greater Idlibistan. There's not much they can do to control the guy who is theoretically running the country as president. He cannot run a kebab shop. Can you imagine a country as complex as Syria? And there are no good prospects around the corner. Absolutely nothing. So Syria is on the verge of a vicious civil war, and it's essentially a country now controlled by a bunch of terrorists, period. There's no other definition. So how can you possibly deal with that? Especially for very serious rational actors such as Tehran and Moscow, not to mention China. Beijing is not saying a word about what's going on in Syria. That's quite disheartening. They should, because Syria was part of their plans for, let's say a new Silk Road corridor as well. For the moment, forget it. So I hate to repeat myself, but it's very, very sad.
Yeah. Perhaps you could now speak about, given that you said they're rational actors, indeed. Could you speak about, help us understand in the time we have remaining, the difference between Eurasian integration led by Russia, China, and Iran, and what we're seeing in Europe, what we're seeing between the United States and the West, we could call Western integration or disintegration in some respects.
Western disintegration.
Talk about the differences, because you've done so much work about what these three countries are able to do. Unfortunately, Syria is not really on the agenda at this moment, but what they are able to do together and for the larger world, that's different from what we're seeing with the disintegration of the West.
Well, this was the theme of my my latest book, the book that I published 10 months ago or so in the US, Eurasia Against NATO Stand. It came out in Italy last month, and the sequel to this book is going to be published in Russia first. They are starting the translation from English to Russian in the next few days. So this next book will be many aspects answering your question, or posing once again this clash between integration of Eurasia and disintegration promoted by NATO stand, based on everything that happened last year, and especially the heavy work put by Russia to have a successful BRICS summit in Kazan last October. But now the whole thing, these past 3 or 4 months, even before Trump's victory, when we have a change of paradigm, and we have now it's NATO stand, which until the beginning of this year was seen as a cohesive whole, as much as it was artificial, was seen as the embodiment of the collective West. Now we are in a different paradigm completely, turned upside down. The death of the collective, the death of the collective West is now staring in front of us, which is something that we could not dream about only a few months ago. So we have a new paradigm. We have Trump as the circus ringmaster, trying to revolutionize, not in a revolutionary sense, a system of international relations, theoretically, with having Russia as a sort of equal partner discussing this new system with the US, so he can concentrate better on what he sees as real threats to the US.
Revolutionary salute to Big AJ for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute.
Number 1, China, and maybe a distant second, Iran. So everything that we were living until a few months ago, it has been turned upside down. So it's not NATO stand against Eurasia anymore. The Eurasia integration process continues. And in many aspects, sometimes the most important actors are the old Primakov triangle, Russia, India, China. And nowadays, the most important actors are let's say, the revamped Primakov triangle, Russia, China, Iran, in many aspects, and also because they are seen by the American ruling classes as the three top strategic threats to the United States, not necessarily to the Trump administration. For the Trump administration is China, no competition, right? So this disaggregation of the collective West is an immensely important geopolitical and also geoeconomic phenomenon, because now they stab themselves in the back, committed seppuku, harakiri, any way you want.
Revolutionary salute to our family. Big AJ for the membership to the House of Revolution, getting his membership to the House of Revolution, help us keep the war, help us keep the lights on. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute to you.
They wanted to define it by themselves, and they won't be able to re-emerge anytime soon. They are throwing themselves in the dustbin of history geopolitically right in front of us. So this is a completely new phenomenon. And it's inbuilt in this reconfiguration of the completely shattered collective West. There's no collective anymore. The leader of the West is the empire. The empire says, and you have to follow, it's our way or the highway, and that includes the rest of the so-called collective West. We don't care about you because you are irrelevant. You are really a bunch of chihuahuas. This is what the Trump administration is telling the leadership of the European Union, the European Commission, especially led by that toxic Medusa, and individual capitals in Europe. It goes way beyond not having them on the table to discuss Ukraine with Russia. They are the menu, not on the table. It goes way beyond that. Because from the point of view of Trump and the people around him, the people who chose him, MAGA means, okay, whatever that is ideologically or not, undercurrents, etc., what we say goes, and we decide what we want for us, and we don't want interlopers or people who are profiting from us. This is the way they think. And for them, they see Europe collectively as profiting from the US. This is going to end one way or another. Then we get to the heart of the matter, but it's still too early. But we can see where this is going. Does Trump has an overall strategic vision to deal with Eurasia integration? Probably not, because he probably doesn't even understand the scope, the breadth, and the reach of Eurasia integration via its multilateral organizations, via what they have been doing this past few years, via the interconnection of BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Eurasia Economic Union, International North-South Transportation Corridor, all that. Very few people in the Beltway have, the beginning of a clue about that. They ignore it completely. And even if they have a clue, they cannot accept it. This is considered anathema because it goes against unilateral domination. So I would say that this whole overarching dynamic of NATO stand against Eurasia is completely reconfigured now in a matter of the past 2 or 3 months, and will keep being reconfigured. The former rules-based international order represented by NATO stand now has been reduced to the no rules whatsoever disorder, which is what's being proposed by Trump 2.0. At the same time, the process of Eurasian integration continues to roll non-stop. And it will, depending on what sort of arrangement we're going to end up in Ukraine, this will influence this integration. The Chinese are drawing endless lessons of how Russia dealt with the proxy war in Ukraine. Iran is learning from the fact that they were, let's say, amputated in their sphere of influence in Lebanon and in Syria. So the reconfiguration continues, and we're going to have a much better idea of which way this is being reconfigured with this BRICS summit in Rio in a matter of 4 months from now. It's nothing. It's literally tomorrow. It's going to be in early July in Rio. Then we're going to have a much better idea, especially the challenges, especially the fact that the Brazilians as leaders.
Revolutionary salute to our family, Big AJ, for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Say salute. Salute to you, family. Absolutely appreciate the love and help me keep the lights on at the House of Revolution.
This year is not exactly the best option, and how they're accommodating the new members and partners, very, very important. The role of Saudi Arabia, will the Saudis, finally decide to be more active inside BRICS, and at the moment they are not. So all these variables are very, very important, and they all play inside this reconfiguration of Eurasia and the solidification of Eurasian alliances. So, the process is the same, and at the same time is not the same anymore. So now let's say it is, again, NATO stand completely fractured on one side, but Eurasia integration reconfiguring itself one day after another on the other side. That's where we are at the moment.
I wanted to ask you one more question as we close here, Pepe. Given that we had an audience member ask this, do you believe that Putin will help U.S. negotiate with Iran and other countries in Asia not aligned with the U.S.? I wanted to pull that up because I wanted to ask if you think it'll work, this strategy that we are seeing where the United States is obviously trying to normalize relations with Russia, but many believe that normalization means that the U.S. will hopefully get concessions on they would want concessions from Russia, hopefully, to break away from that process you just spoke about, in particular, their relations with China and Iran. Do you think it can work?
Well, we can never forget that empires work based on divide and rule, right? Especially the American empire. Whoever is in the White House or controlling different silos of power across the belt and all that, the basic rationale is divide and rule. So this will be another divide and rule. There's a lot of blah, blah, blah about reverse Nixon. It's possible to a certain extent, but the Russians know very well the original Nixon, which was related to the Soviet Union. One of the most important things that Wang Yi said at his press conference at the end of the 2 sessions in Beijing, once again reiterating that Russia-China relationship is up there and no outside interference is going to break it. Absolutely, because this is what both sides feel. This is felt in Moscow and in Beijing at the highest levels. So Trump trying to play Russia against China will go nowhere. At the same time, assuming he would like to have a settlement with Iran, and he's been saying that on the record, that he would like to have some sort of deal. How the Iranians can possibly trust the empire, and especially Trump, who broke a deal that had been clinched before. So the only possibility of having some sort of, let's say, a fresh start and a possible interaction between Washington and Tehran is via Moscow. They have the diplomatic savoir-faire to do that. They have Putin and they have Lavrov, they have Ryabkov, they have everybody that can do that. It's possible. We don't know what Trump really wants. This could be another circus ringmaster bombastic announcement. This could mean nothing, or this could mean something that is in his head. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. And obviously, of course, the interests of the mega powerful Zionist lobby and the Zionist lobby that is behind Trump. So that's too many variables. But assuming this would proceed, there will be no better moderator than Russia to try to find some sort of deal between the US and Iran. Just like, was there a better moderator to find some sort of deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran? Well, it started with Russia. When Russia talked to Saudi Arabia, talked to Iran, got them more or less together, the ball went to Beijing, and then Russia told the Chinese, now, okay, they're going to Beijing and they will sign it. And you will get the credit for it. This is how ultra high stakes diplomacy works. And in the case of US-Iran, there's no other possible mediator. It's going to be Russia.
Pepe, yes, we can close here because we're at the hour. Thanks so much for coming on.
Just forget about his. It is March 10th, 2025, and it's being reported that thousands of civilians in Syria have been killed in massacres at the hands of the death squads overseen by Syria's brand new al-Qaeda leader, Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani. And yes, I'm still calling him that, even though many in the Western media have tried to whitewash his identity and to act as though just forget about his ISIS and al-Qaeda linked past, as if that was just a phase, and he's now completely different, and he's not overseeing the horrific massacres of minorities in Western Syria that are still ongoing, as if the West as a whole, that being the governments and the media, are not actively working to cover up those massacres, but just claiming that it's more regional clashes with a few revenge killings thrown in. So where does the situation stand? What is the media not showing you, and where could things go from here? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is independent journalist Vanessa Beeley, who has lived in and reported from Syria. Vanessa, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
No, thank you for having me on, Rachel, during this very difficult time for Syria, of course.
Yeah, I'm always grateful to get your insight. And I know it is, we've talked in the past. I've interviewed you about the situation in Syria, and it feels like some of our worst fears are kind of now becoming a reality. I know you've got reports that hundreds of Syrian civilians have been killed. You've also got estimates saying that there are thousands actually killed, and that the West is now covering this up after Alawite minorities were targeted in just horrific massacres carried out by al-Jawlani's death squads that went from house to house, executing entire families. I mean, the images and videos are all over social media, but will you start by taking us through just how bad this situation actually is and what the media isn't covering?
Well, I mean, basically, not only is the media not covering it, of course, they're covering it up. And they have been since the 8th of December, when actually the al-Qaeda junta came to power, illegitimately, of course, backed by Turkey, Israel, the US, the UK, the Gulf states, in order to overthrow the Syrian government and to destabilize the country. And this regime change war had been ongoing since 2011, finally successful after a series of military and economic savage measures against the Syrian people and their government. since 2011. In 2024, of course, it finally came to fruition. And these ethnic cleansing pogroms began then, not only actually against the Alawites, but against the Christians, against the Shia community, Shia Muslim communities, even against Sunni Muslims that did not comply with the extremist takfiri Islam that these factions are trying to rule Syria with. Syria is a country that has never accepted this kind of takfiri backward ideology. It's a country that has always honored its diversity. It's always been inclusive of all of the minorities that live and coexist inside Syria. And actually what we're seeing now, on the pretext of fighting against so-called regime remnants, we're seeing actually the continuation of the ethnic cleansing that began in 2011. Because just to remind people, in 2013, for example, from 2011 until 2013, there were very similar ethnic cleansing programs being carried out on the Latakia coast, on the coastal areas, against Alawites, against Shia Muslim communities. I was just writing about one today in Bluta, when over 200 civilians were massacred by Nusra Front and the so-called moderates in the Free Syrian Army. And so really what happened is this ethnic cleansing was part of the project from the beginning, backed by the US and the UK. It was interrupted, if you like, by the Syrian Arab Army, by the presidency, by the resistance of the Syrian people against this Takfiri project. But now in 2024, it can continue unabated, and that's what we're seeing. And when you talk about hundreds, actually those numbers are being put out by organizations, or media organizations like Al Jazeera, backed by Qatar. Of course, Qatar poured billions into the regime change war from the beginning. And the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, that's an EU-funded Nusra Front Muslim Brotherhood partisan so-called organization. It's run by one guy in Coventry in the UK. And his numbers are also always very downplaying of the HTS atrocities committed against Syrian civilians, and particularly against the minorities that are in the media outlets described as part of the Assad tribe, right? And what we've actually seen in the last few days, those numbers are kept very low. Others in the region are telling us there are literally thousands being killed. Entire villages are being wiped out. They have no internet, they have no food, no water, no electricity. And the terrorists are entering these villages and killing everyone in sight. But it's not only Alawites. I mean, today, for example, there was a killing of a Christian faith leader who actually is part of the congregation that goes from Akka in northern Lebanon to Wadi Nasara, the Christian valley close to Homs inside Syria. Maronite Christians have been killed in the last few days. Christian communities that are sheltering Alawites have been attacked and killed. There is a Sunni sheikh in Damascus who was speaking out against the atrocities. He was taken out of his house, he was tortured, and he was executed in front of his children. He's Sunni. So for me, you know, this is extremely clear that this isn't about only the Alawites. This is about the killing of anyone that is not going to comply with al-Jolani's government ideology. His entire government is made up of former Al-Qaeda members, the majority of whom, by the way, have Turkish nationality. So they're not even Syrian.
Wow, yeah, it's horrific to watch, and you bring up some really important points and context there. And it's almost hard to cover this in some ways, because you look at exactly as you were saying, you know, the quote unquote official numbers that are being repeated by the media aren't remotely true. Outlets like Al Jazeera are clearly showing their true colors right now with some of the headlines that they have had. It's just disgusting to watch. And part of this cover up is to say, oh, these are just clashes, right? It's, you know, pro-Assad people versus anti-Assad people, and they're just fighting. And then the media will throw in, as the Associated Press did, that there were, hundreds of quote unquote revenge killings. So that's what this genocide is now being referred to, just some revenge killings against the civilians. How do you view that cover up and that decision to kind of try to separate al-Jilani and his new government from his death squads that are carrying out these horrific acts, and to act like there is a separation between the two?
There is no separation. I mean, what we're being told by people on the coast is, for example, members of HTS are usually the first to come into the towns and villages. They're targeting basically the men, the young men. They're killing them, as you said, as Assad remnants. And I just want to address this whole Assad remnant thing. Look, there were for years in Syria a majority of Syrians that supported and stood in solidarity with the Assad government against the Takfiri project that was being funded by multiple countries in the US alliance. And of course, who were being funded and armed by Israel also from 2011 onwards. And how can you describe the majority of the population of the Syria as simply as Assad remnants? It's a country that, any country, any sovereign nation, people are not going to agree politically, but are you just going to go and massacre them? This is the whole point. And the fact is that, yes, the Trump administration has put out the statement that they condemn the atrocities and they want Jolani to investigate the atrocities. Well, what does this remind me of? This reminds me of Israel being told to investigate its genocide of Palestinians. It's exactly the same MO. It's a legal or legitimizing fig leaf to separate, as you said, Jolani from the atrocities that are being committed not only by his own security forces, but by the foreign mercenaries that come under the umbrella of HTS and always have done. And these same foreign mercenaries, these same factions, were committing atrocities against Syrian people in Idlib. It's no different. There were multiple arbitrary executions in Idlib. Members of Jolani's government were responsible for those executions under their version of Sharia law in Idlib. And so therefore, we should not really be very surprised that it's continuing now across Syria. And the fact that people are expecting Jolani to investigate his own crimes, of which he's also guilty of, by the way, but strangely, his rebranding from Mohammed Jolani to Ahmed al-Sharaa seems to have wiped his slate clean, as has the dissolution of HTS as an organization. This is just great. Should I change my name so I can go back to the UK and not get accused of being a terrorist for supporting the genocide in Palestine? Because that's exactly what's happening. And this is completely being legitimized by the West, by the Western media outlets, by the Western UN agencies that are there right now, really producing a cover-up for al-Jilani.
Yeah, it's crazy to me how they've done that name change so quickly to just be like, what, the old al-Jilani was the one, he was the founder of Al-Qaeda in Syria, but just ignore that because now he's al-Sharaa and he's this great Syrian leader who is meeting with Western officials and, being paraded around the UN as if these atrocities are not happening, not just under his watch, but he is complicit in them, as you were saying. And it reminds me of the cover-up that is the quote-unquote Syrian civil war, right? That's always what we're told. It's just a bunch of Syrians fighting each other. But as you were pointing out there, when you have all of these individuals that are now under al-Jilani's command that they have Turkish nationality or they're not from Syria, it serves as a reminder of just how much foreign involvement there is in this poor country. I mean, talking from Turkey to Israel to Qatar to the US and the EU and the UK, how do you see this now escalated violence playing into really kind of the bigger picture and this plan to break up Syria, right? To take it away from what it was under Assad, where you were able to have multiple different minorities and nationalities living together and different religions living all together, but now to where you have this increase in sectarian violence, and the West is just kind of standing back and being like, oh yeah, we condemn that, but we need you guys to investigate.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I think, for decades, really, we've been heading towards the partitioning of the region, really, but of Syria primarily. If we go back to 2016, Kerry, Secretary of State Kerry, under the Obama administration, was talking about Plan B, which was the Balkanization of Syria. If we go even further back, of course, to 1997, to the Clean Break Doctrine, that was a paper written basically by the CIA at the behest of then, I can't remember which position in the government he had then, but Benjamin Netanyahu, which again was signaling the potential for the Balkanization of the entire region into smaller statelets that would be sympathetic or would normalize relations with Israel in the future. And of course, that's what we're heading towards now, because while Giuliani is carrying out these ethnic cleansing programs across Syria, but focused very much centralized on the coastal areas, of course, Israel is advancing even further into Syrian territory. It's taken control of areas north of Dara to the south of Damascus. There have been moves recently when there were clashes between the Druze factions in Jaramana, which is to the southeast of Damascus, that Israel would intervene to protect the Druze, and the Druze have become sort of a protected minority in Syria by Israel. You will notice that HTS are not going near the Druze. They are protecting them. They are preventing any of the effects that are being suffered by the Alawites and the Christians and other minorities happening to the Druze, because Israel has made it very clear that they will go against HTS on behalf of the Druze. Of course, they don't really care about the Druze. They just see the Druze as a means to actually advance closer to Damascus, to the southeast of Damascus, close to the Shia Muslim pilgrimage site of Sayyidah Zainab, which of course has been bombed regularly in the past by Israel, and then to progress to what is known as David Corridor, which is basically a channel up the eastern border of Syria, linking with the Kurdish separatists in the northeast under the control of the US, but also acting as a settler proxy for Israel in that area, close to the east of the Euphrates, and eventually to link up with the Euphrates in Iraq. This is the Greater Israel Plan, and this is what Israel is basically working towards right now. Now, very recently, which is interesting for me, there have been signs of collaboration between Russia and Israel inside Syria, with Israel lobbying the US for Russia to keep its bases on the coast. Now, why is this happening? Because both Russia and Israel have an interest in preventing Erdogan's neo-Ottoman expansionism. Israel in the east and the northeast, and Russia wants to maintain its bases on the coastal region, partly also, I think, because it signed an exclusive gas exploration deal in 2013 with the then Syrian government that has never really been exploited. The last thing that Russia wants is, for example, Turkey to get control of the coastal region and to the gas rights, right? So what you're seeing right now, in my opinion, looking at Hebrew media, looking even at Reuters and AP, there's a very clear collaboration between Russia and Israel to basically enable the Israeli David Corridor project, but also to maintain a Russian presence on the coast in Syria. So we're definitely heading towards the Balkanization of Syria. I'm not entirely hopeless that it can be prevented, but it's a very slim hope. I mean, the popular resistance that has been battling HTS in the coastal region in particular, but also down towards Homs in Hama, in the Al-Gab plain, which is to the south of Idlib, People have been dismissing them as Iranian-backed or Hezbollah-backed, but in reality, I know for a fact that they have insisted on being Syrian, that they don't want at the moment any external interference. This is a Syrian battle. And that Syrian popular resistance has no backing at the moment from Iran or Hezbollah. And it's fighting against the previous ethnic cleansing that was ongoing since December. Of course, Giuliani is using that as leverage to justify the current massacres that are ongoing. But the reality is the popular resistance, of course, as always, is targeting HTS military. It's not targeting civilians. But HTS, as they did throughout the regime change war in Syria, are targeting civilians. They're massacring civilians. They're not targeting the military sectors unless they actually come under ambush. And this was the MO during the regime change war. Instead of fighting the Syrian military, what would they do? They would bomb civilian areas in Damascus or Aleppo or Homs in order to put pressure on the army to cease fire or to withdraw or to allow aid into them and so on and so forth. So this is absolutely standard behavior by Giuliani. It's not about a military war. It's about a war against ethnic minorities inside Syria to ensure the dominance of what is a Wahhabi Takfiri cult that has been imposed upon Syria by the Gulf states, by Israel, by Turkey, and by the West.
Yeah, wow, it's so interesting to me when you think of kind of the greater chessboard of it all. And as you were pointing out, it's interesting to see how both Israel and Turkey, right, they wanted to see the downfall of Assad. They want that land, but they also have competing interests, right? They can only go so far before they start going up against each other. And then on top of that, I look at Russia and I go, Russia has been so careful when it comes to Israel, right? Israel's carrying out an all-out genocide, and Russia's been very careful in their statements and the way that they handle Israel, not getting too far onto their bad side. At the same time, Russia is also very careful when it comes to Turkey. So I'm looking at this going, okay, this is going to get very interesting here. Now, I'm also curious too on the end of the US and the UK and the EU and kind of where the West as a whole stands, because I saw reports earlier that al-Giuliani has been invited to Brussels for a donor conference next week. So basically they're saying we're going to pour money into your government, right? Give you whatever you want, and reward your targeting of the minorities in Syria. How do you see that pairing? And I mean, to me, it's so obvious, this Western involvement, but it seems like so many people are still not awake to this and still going with the same old lies and propaganda that we've been told, going back to 2011 now.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole sanctions lifting sort of narrative is just insane. I think Switzerland came out a couple of days ago saying that it would alleviate some of the sanctions on Syria, while, as you said, Giuliani is effectively committing a genocide. I don't think that's too strong a term. When you start wiping out entire villages, entire towns, a friend of mine from the coastal areas told me, Vanessa, we're just counting the bodies in the streets. Literally, I can't even imagine what it's like and how little ability these people have to be able to communicate, partly because they're terrified, but partly also because the internet is being cut. They're not being allowed to communicate. And even now the UN is there, they're being threatened if they speak about any of the massacres. The white helmets, the CIA MI6 white helmets are basically disposing of the bodies on behalf of Al-Qaeda. Again, that's something that they've done since they were established in 2013. And so when we see this absolute, I don't even think hypocrisy is a strong enough word for what the EU and the UK are doing. I mean, we had Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. Of course, Alistair Campbell was the spin doctor for Tony Blair, another war criminal from the UK, who came to Damascus to legitimize Giuliani and to interview him in the so-called presidential palace. And this is what they've been working to do since December the 8th, is to completely legitimize an Al-Qaeda government, to alleviate the economic pressure on the country now that he's in power. And the fact that, they were claiming all the time that sanctions were being maintained and increased on Syria, that they were targeting the leadership only, they weren't targeting the people. Of course, now that argument is completely reversed. And they're telling EU countries and the UK and the US, but hang on, the sanctions are completely punishing the people. It's collective punishment. But that wasn't the case when President Assad was in power. No. They were campaigning for sanctions to be increased, right? And so basically, yes, what we're seeing is again, the legitimization of genocide, just as we saw with Palestine, when the UK and the EU member countries were basically defending Israel, continuing to supply arms, continuing to normalize the genocide or even defend the genocide. That's exactly what they're doing now. And again, another point to make, which is very important, is that since Giuliani came to power, the EU has closed their borders to refugees from Syria. But during the regime change war, those borders were open to a majority of the same extremist elements now under the control of Giuliani that are conducting the massacres inside Syria. I'm not saying all refugees were from those extremist elements, but a large number of them are, because we're seeing them now in Europe condoning the massacres and actually encouraging the massacres by Giuliani of the Alawite and other minority communities. And so, the hypocrisy to be inviting Giuliani to, as you said, a donor conference, while closing their borders to the genuinely persecuted minorities in Syria and opening the exit routes, if you like, for the radicals and the extremists that were most likely radicalized and trained in Europe and in the UK before being exported to Syria in the first place anyway. There's multiple documentation of that. To allow them to go back to Syria to increase Giuliani's forces.
Wow, it's hypocritical all around. And I know that we should not be surprised by any of this, but because we are kind of fighting against these forces in the West, not only the governments, but the media, the propaganda that they continue to put out there, and the fact that they will look at these horrific massacres targeting civilians in their homes, in their villages, and just shrug it off and say, oh, those are clashes. That just happens. It's like, these are the things that are being put out there that people are believing. And so it really, it makes the work that you're doing more important than ever. And I appreciate you continuing to speak out and to raise awareness, and for taking the time to join me today to give insight on all of this. Independent journalist Vanessa B. Lee, thank you so much for your time.
Was in the lead in the first runoff of the presidential election in Romania, with more than 50% of the vote, with the rest split between 7 or 8 candidates. It was a flagrant election-stealing piece of skullduggery, the likes of which had never been seen in the European Union before. There was outrage, but the election was to be rerun. Georgescu's nomination papers were accepted, and the opinion polls show he was set for a landslide victory in the Romanian presidential election. And today, the very same electoral board of judges and non-judges have invalidated his presidential candidature. It is truly unbelievable that in a European Union that describes itself as a garden of democracy, that such incredible criminality can be shown in an important and large European Union country, namely Romania. It is incredible still that nobody in the Western media is giving it any coverage at all. How could they? It is the most flagrant theft of the Romanian people's democratic rights that it is possible to imagine. And there's only 24 hours to sort it out. I'm unequivocal on this, that if the Supreme Court of Romania does not reverse this blatant theft and criminality, the Romanian people will have to rise up and remove their regime. They have done so once before, you may recall. It didn't end well on Christmas Day of 1989 for Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena, who were gunned down by a firing squad against the wall. It is incredible that the only offense, by the way, Ceausescu politically is a world apart from me. I'm not carrying a flag for him, except in one regard. And it's the one regard that has led to this theft, this attempted coup d'etat. Ceausescu wants to end the war in Ukraine. He refuses to allow Romania to be built into a NATO base camp to be used across the short sea against the Russian Federation. He refuses to allow Romania to be anybody's puppet state. And that's the only thing I have in common with him. He's a figure of the right, of the nationalist right. He makes Nigel Farage look like a leftist. I have nothing whatsoever to do with him. But I do love Romania. I do actually have a book published in the Romanian language. I was there very recently. I love the people, I love the country, and I will not stand silent while their rights are trampled upon and while their presidential election is stolen. It was a massacre of the minorities, and helpfully, you may think, the mass murderers filmed themselves whilst doing it. During Ramadan, with grins all over their faces, they hunted down and gunned down men and women, young and old, the only common characteristic, all unarmed. Such tough guys, these head-chopping, heart-eating, fanatic Islamist extremists are. They're very good at cutting the heads of people whose hands are tied behind their back and who cannot fight them back. They're very good at murdering women, although they like to keep their women locked away, and they like to keep the women they stole from other people locked away. Yazidi women, for example. They are big on women's modesty, but that doesn't stretch to not murdering them in their homes. Helpfully, you may think they've filmed themselves doing it. Therefore, the culpability cannot be shared. The culpability cannot be obscured. They had their patches, ISIS and Al-Qaeda patches, on their arms. They were chanting obscenely the name of God whilst they murdered people in cold blood, many hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them. And yet, this massacre of the minorities in Syria over the last few days is virtually unreported on Western media, particularly in those countries that did the most to put these maniacs into power, to usher the black flags of ISIS and Al-Qaeda into Damascus. Their media, so tightly controlled, they're not even reporting a massacre of Christian people, of Alawi people, of Shia and Druze people by their clients, by their agents, by the people they armed and funded. David Lammy gave £50 million to these people just last week. The British Foreign Secretary gave £50 million of your money. Do you know what for? To help them build an inclusive government. Inclusive government. Well, that inclusive government's gunmen just massacred the people that London presumably was referring to as those that needed to be included. included. The United States is the only country in the Western world that has roundly condemned the massacre and has attributed to the people who took the videos. You hear what I'm saying? They took the videos. The United States presidency attributed it to the Islamist fanatics of HTS, the rebrand of Al-Qaeda in Syria, and their ISIS allies. The European Union, on the other hand, did not mention the people who took the videos and blamed the minorities for getting themselves massacred. It was community noted on Twitter within half an hour, but it still stands extant as the European Union's position on the massacre of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. The legendary white helmets are already in, cleaning up. I've got a picture on my phone of the white helmets picking up the corpses, dumping them in skips to take them away, just in case there's any international observer remotely interested in finding out what happened. But of course, so far, there are none. The European Union backed HTS and the mass murderers. The United States condemned the mass murderers. The British government, on the other hand, has said nothing at all, least of all asking for its £50 million back, now that we know that the idea of an inclusive government in Syria has just been drowned in blood. I asked, it's been very widely shared and remarked upon on Twitter, will anybody at all, intervene to defend the Christians of Syria where Jesus once walked, the people who speak the language of Jesus, Aramaic? Will anybody intervene? If this was in Yugoslavia, NATO would already be there. If this was in any other part of the world, the demand for United Nations action, the demand for RTP, right to protect, the right to humanitarian intervention would already be filling our airwaves. But as I've told you, the airwaves are entirely silent. So no hue and cry is possible. No one will intervene except Russia. Russia has already intervened. It has opened its airbase in Latakia, and something like 20,000 refugees are now cowering inside it. Daring, I suppose, if you think that the ISIS and Al-Qaeda people would not like to clamber over the wall of the Russian airbase. You don't know them like I know them. Iran, if they were to move in to protect their co-religionists, would declare war on them. If Iraq intervened to protect their co-religionists, we'd declare war on Iraq. If anybody at all were to intervene, it would be condemned, unless it was Israel, which is already in possession of fully 1/3 of Syrian territory and is undoubtedly dancing a jig of delight, like that one on top of that van in New York City on 9/11, because this is exactly the Syria they spent so much lobbying time trying to bring about. I said many times, for 10 years I've been saying to you that what we have done in Syria is the dirtiest thing that we have ever done, and we have done many dirty things. It is beyond the comprehension of any sentient being who was given the facts, key caveat, that we would have tried so much, so hard to bring Al-Qaeda and ISIS to power in a country on the Mediterranean, the European lake. I just say this, it's all I can say. I'm out of words, to be honest. If you think these Uzbeks and Tajiks and Uyghurs and Algerians that are cutting the throats of the minorities in Syria are going to remain in Syria and not visit a Christmas market near you, or a London Bridge or a Bataclan or any of the other massacres carried out by precisely these very same people, you're an idiot. You don't deserve the vote if you're going to vote for people that will put knives in the hands of these assassins who will later come to assassinate you. Now, the disaster in Kursk is almost painfully poignant to recount. It was his biggest victory, said Zelensky, when he invaded Russian territory as a quid pro quo for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He poured reinforcements into it. Well over 100,000 soldiers were poured into the Kursk salient in Russia, and they have resisted an enormous counterattack by Russia to remove them. It's not looking that much like a victory now, and I take no pleasure in that, because for some reason, whether it's blockers behind them who'll shoot them if they try to surrender, these brave Ukrainian soldiers have refused to surrender, even although they are completely surrounded and there is no way out of the Kursk salient now. Russia has given them deadline after deadline to surrender their weapons, NATO weapons, the best NATO weapons. There'll be some great reverse engineering done when this is all over in Kursk. But the Ukrainian soldiers are not surrendering, and therefore Russia is about to rain down fatal firepower upon them, and scores of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers will be destroyed. Those of you who say you love Ukraine, those of you who wave Ukrainian flags, wear Ukrainian badges, have Ukrainian flags in your avatars, you don't love Ukraine. You hate Ukrainians. You must hate Ukrainians because you have cheered on every maneuver, every effort that has so spectacularly rebounded on the suffering people of Ukraine. I can only conclude that you hate Ukraine. You don't love it at all. It's not Slava Ukraine that you're shouting, really. It's death to Ukraine. At least it's death to Ukrainians, because perhaps 1 million of them have already lost their lives, and hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of them are maimed, mutilated, or their minds destroyed for the rest of their lives because of the proxy war that you helped propel them into. Now, I used to be called a Russian agent for calling it a proxy war. This was a Putin talking point, don't you know? Except it's now a Donald Trump administration talking point. Both Rubio and Kellogg, General Kellogg, have both stated unequivocally, this is a proxy war between the United States and the Russian Federation. And all you idiots that, like Pavlov's dogs, barked, Putin, 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 whenever anybody said that, whether it was Candace Owens or me, must feel, or at least ought to feel, thoroughly embarrassed now. So now that the American administration has openly declared it to be a proxy war in which they have no further interest, and the examples of the extent to which that's true will be adumbrated by my first guest, Ray McGovern, in just a few minutes. Now that one side of a proxy war is withdrawing, you'd think that would mean the end of the war, except you didn't bargain for little soldier Schultz, little Merz, little Anna Baerbock, little Napoleon Macron, and little Keir Starmer. Because out of nowhere, like the 600, they have decided to gallop into the valley of death, into the guns, onward and onward, into the guns. The unfortunate thing is it's not them on the horses. The unfortunate thing is it's not them that are going to be cut down by the guns. It's your sons and even your daughters. Latvia today announced the beginning of conscription for boys and girls. When I launched last week the No Conscription League in Britain, I hadn't quite counted on the amount of support that it would immediately rally, including a very significant number, a statistically significant number of ex-service personnel, the only people really who know what war is really like. And even if you have no son or daughter about to be sent into the guns, it's your money that's going to pay for it. I have only 1 minute to deal with a very strange phenomenon, which in the last 48 hours has erupted in the United States. First of all, a professor at UCLA, not a small deal that, a professor at the UCLA has in writing called for the US military to stage a military coup in Washington and remove the Trump administration from office. A House staffer was caught with a gun in the rotunda headed for the very room that President Trump was sitting in earlier last week. And he said he didn't understand what the big deal was because he'd brought the same gun into the same building the day before as a kind of dry run. White House security men shot and wounded a man in the grounds of the White House who was armed earlier today. And J.D. Vance, the able Vice President of the United States, was surrounded by Ukrainian protesters as he walked, unwisely I must say, with his 3-year-old child, who was terrified at the Slava Ukrainian crowd that angrily surrounded the Vice President of the United States. All of this tells me that the security forces of the United States of America have not stepped up to the mark. And we may very well see another nightmare on Elm Street, a la Dallas, Texas, November 1963, in 2025, somewhere in America. If that doesn't make you sit up and take notice, I don't know what would. Ray McGovern, former
Did you know that China accounts for nearly 40% of the world's industrial robot installations as of 2023, surpassing every other country combined? Or consider this provocative question. Could China's massive investment in robotics and artificial intelligence reshape the future of warfare, making human soldiers obsolete on the battlefield? Before we begin with this intriguing story, we appreciate that you subscribe to our channel, share, and like our video so that we can bring you more content similar to this one. Thank you so much for your support. The concept of a humanoid army may sound like science fiction, but it is rapidly becoming a tangible reality with profound implications for global power dynamics. Imagine armies composed not of human soldiers, but of autonomous or semi-autonomous machines, drones, unmanned ground vehicles, and even humanoid robots, capable of executing complex military operations with precision, speed, and minimal risk to human life. For nations like China, which has been aggressively investing in robotics, AI, and advanced manufacturing, the development of such a force represents both an opportunity and a strategic imperative. China's push toward militarized robotics is deeply intertwined with its broader ambitions to achieve technological supremacy. Under its Made in China 2025 initiative and subsequent policies, Beijing has prioritized advancements in AI, robotics, and automation, not only for economic competitiveness but also for military dominance. The integration of these technologies into its armed forces could enable China to project power more effectively while reducing casualties, a critical consideration in modern warfare where public tolerance for human losses is increasingly low. The implications of a Chinese humanoid army extend far beyond regional conflicts. On one hand, it could deter adversaries by showcasing overwhelming technological superiority. On the other hand, it raises concerns about escalation risks, as automated systems might make decisions faster than humans can intervene, potentially leading to unintended confrontations. Moreover, if China successfully pioneers this domain, it could shift the balance of global military power, challenging the United States' long-standing dominance and forcing other nations to adapt quickly, or risk obsolescence. China's growing interest in militarizing robotics is evident through several key trends and developments that signal its intention to integrate advanced robotic systems into both civilian and military applications. These efforts often blur the lines between peaceful innovation and defense-oriented objectives, leveraging dual-use technologies that can serve both sectors. Below are some notable examples and signs of China's push toward militarized robotics. 1. Dual-use robot dogs and wolves. Companies like Unitree Robotics have developed quadrupedal robots, commonly referred to as robot dogs, capable of navigating complex terrains, carrying payloads, and performing surveillance tasks. While marketed for commercial purposes such as logistics, search and rescue, and industrial inspections, these platforms are inherently adaptable for military use. Chinese state media has showcased robot dogs equipped with cameras, sensors, and even weapons during military drills. Their agility and ability to operate in challenging environments make them ideal for reconnaissance, patrolling, and frontline support roles. Larger versions of these quadrupeds, sometimes called robot wolves, have been tested for border security and perimeter defense. For instance, reports indicate their deployment along contested borders, where they patrol autonomously and detect intrusions using eye-powered sensors. 2. Humanoid robots mimicking human movements. Advances in humanoid design. Chinese tech firms and research institutions are developing humanoid robots capable of mimicking human movements with remarkable precision. These robots can walk, climb stairs, manipulate objects, and interact with their surroundings, all skills that could translate directly to battlefield scenarios requiring dexterity and adaptability. In recent years, humanoid robots have begun live testing in urban environments for security patrols. For example, some models have been deployed at airports, train stations, and public events to monitor crowds, identify suspicious behavior, and provide real-time data to law enforcement agencies. This civilian application serves as a stepping stone for potential military uses, such as urban combat or hostage situations. Humanoid robots are also being explored as training tools for soldiers, simulating enemy combatants in realistic exercises to enhance troop readiness. 3. Swarm drones and autonomous systems. Drone swarms. One of China's most visible advancements is in swarm drone technology. Demonstrations by companies like Xi'an UAV and state-backed organizations have featured hundreds of drones operating in coordinated formations, capable of overwhelming enemy defenses or conducting mass reconnaissance missions. Swarm drones can be weaponized to carry explosives or disrupt communication networks, making them highly effective in asymmetric warfare. They offer a low-cost, high-impact solution that aligns with China's strategy of leveraging technology to counter more conventionally powerful adversaries. Unmanned ground vehicles designed for logistics, mine clearance, and direct combat roles are increasingly part of China's military inventory. Some UGVs are already undergoing field trials, demonstrating capabilities ranging from autonomous navigation to remote-controlled weapon systems. 4. Integration of AI and robotics. A core component of China's robotic ambitions is the integration of artificial intelligence. AI enables robots to process vast amounts of data, recognize patterns, and make decisions autonomously, features critical for modern warfare. For example, surveillance robots equipped with facial recognition and behavioral analysis software can track individuals across large areas. Autonomous targeting systems allow drones and UGVs to engage targets without human intervention, raising ethical questions about accountability and escalation risks. Beyond physical combat, China is exploring how AI-driven robots can influence psychological operations, psyops, and information warfare. Social media bots, deepfake generators, and automated propaganda dissemination are all part of this broader effort to dominate cognitive domains. 5. State-sponsored research and military-civil fusion. Under President Xi Jinping, China has aggressively promoted military-civil fusion policies aimed at merging civilian technological innovations with military applications. This framework ensures that breakthroughs in robotics, AI, and other fields are rapidly adapted for defense purposes. Universities, private companies, and government labs collaborate closely under military-civil fusion initiatives, ensuring that cutting-edge technologies like robot dogs, humanoid robots, and swarm drones are optimized for military utility. At international defense exhibitions, such as Airshow China, Chinese manufacturers frequently display robotic systems tailored for military use. These demonstrations highlight not only technical progress but also China's willingness to export these technologies globally, potentially reshaping regional power balances. 6. Testing in real-world scenarios. As mentioned earlier, China has reportedly deployed robotic systems along disputed borders, particularly in regions like Tibet and Xinjiang. These deployments serve dual purposes, enhancing domestic security while simultaneously refining the technology for future conflicts. Military exercises involving robots in simulated urban environments suggest preparations for scenarios like city sieges or counterterrorism operations. The focus on adaptability and autonomy underscores the emphasis on preparing for diverse combat conditions. To transform humanoid robots into a formidable robot army, a combination of advanced technologies must be developed and integrated. These technologies span multiple domains, including hardware, software, AI, materials science, and energy systems. Here is an in-depth exploration of the key technological components required to weaponize humanoid robots effectively. 1. Advanced mobility and dexterity. Humanoid robots need to navigate diverse terrains and perform complex tasks with precision. This requires a. Bipedal locomotion. Humanoid robots must maintain balance while walking, running, or climbing uneven surfaces. Technologies like gyroscopes, accelerometers, and real-time feedback control systems are essential for dynamic stability. AI-driven algorithms allow robots to adjust their gait based on terrain conditions, mimicking human adaptability. B. Dexterous manipulation. Advanced actuators and joints enable humanoid robots to manipulate objects, handle weapons, and perform intricate tasks such as opening doors or disarming traps. High-resolution tactile sensors provide feedback about pressure, texture, and grip strength, enabling precise interactions with the environment. C. Endurance and agility. Lightweight yet durable materials, for example, carbon fiber composites, reduce weight while maintaining structural integrity, allowing for extended operational periods. High torque motors and efficient power transmission systems enhance agility and speed. 2. AI and autonomous decision-making. AI is the backbone of any robot army, enabling autonomous operation and decision-making in dynamic environments. A. Perception systems. Cameras, lidar, and infrared sensors combined with deep learning algorithms allow robots to identify objects, recognize faces, and interpret visual data in real time. AI models process sensor inputs to create detailed maps of surroundings, detect obstacles, and predict changes in the battlefield. B. Cognitive processing. AI can analyze mission objectives, assess risks, and generate optimal strategies for achieving goals. Robots equipped with reinforcement learning can adapt to new situations, improving performance over time through trial and error. C. Swarm intelligence. For large-scale operations, humanoid robots may operate in coordinated swarms. Swarm intelligence algorithms ensure seamless communication and collaboration among units, enabling them to execute complex maneuvers collectively. D. Ethical constraints. To prevent unintended escalation, AI systems must incorporate ethical guidelines that govern when and how lethal force is used. However, implementing these constraints without compromising effectiveness remains a challenge. 3. Weaponization capabilities. Transforming humanoid robots into combat-ready units involves
It kicked me out. Let me set this back up.
prevent unintended escalation. AI systems must incorporate ethical guidelines that govern when and how lethal force is used. However, implementing these constraints without compromising effectiveness remains a challenge. 3. Weaponization capabilities. Transforming humanoid robots into combat-ready units involves integrating various weapon systems tailored to specific missions. A. Mounted weapons. Compact firearms mounted on robotic arms can deliver accurate firepower. These include rifles, machine guns, or even grenade launchers. Less than lethal tools such as tasers, tear gas dispensers, or sound-based crowd control devices expand the versatility of humanoid robots. B. Integrated weapon systems. Modular designs allow robots to switch between different weapon types depending on the mission profile. Automatic reloading mechanisms and ammunition storage compartments ensure sustained engagement during prolonged operations. C. Directed energy weapons. Lasers, microwave emitters, or electromagnetic pulse (EMP) generators could neutralize enemy electronics or disable drones and vehicles. D. Explosive payloads. Some humanoid robots may carry explosives for demolition missions or suicide attacks in high-risk scenarios. 4. Power and energy management. Sustained operation in combat zones requires reliable and efficient energy solutions. A. High-capacity batteries. Lithium-ion or solid-state batteries with high energy density provide long-lasting power for mobility and computation. Fast charging capabilities minimize downtime during recharging cycles. B. Energy harvesting. Solar panels, kinetic energy recovery systems, or thermoelectric generators supplement primary power sources, extending operational range. C. Hybrid power systems. Combining batteries with small fuel cells or internal combustion engines ensures flexibility in energy usage, particularly for heavy-duty tasks. 5. Communication and networking. Effective coordination among robot units depends on robust communication networks. A. Secure communication protocols. Encrypted wireless communications prevent adversaries from intercepting or jamming signals. Mesh networking allows robots to relay information peer-to-peer, creating resilient communication grids. B. Satellite connectivity. Integration with satellite systems enables global positioning, remote command and control, and real-time updates from headquarters. C. Edge computing. Onboard processors reduce reliance on centralized servers by performing computations locally, ensuring autonomy even if network connectivity is disrupted. 6. Durability and survivability. Combat environments demand ruggedized designs capable of withstanding extreme conditions. A. Armor and protection. Lightweight armor made from advanced materials, for example, graphene, Kevlar composites, shields critical components from bullets, shrapnel, and explosions. Self-healing polymers repair minor damage automatically, extending the lifespan of robots. B. Thermal regulation. Active cooling systems prevent overheating of electronic components during intense operations. C. Redundancy and fault tolerance. Redundant subsystems ensure continued functionality even if some parts fail due to damage or malfunction. 7. Logistics and maintenance. A robot army requires efficient logistics to remain operational. A. Autonomous resupply. Logistic robots transport spare parts, ammunition, and fuel to frontline units, reducing dependence on human supply chains. B. Self-repair mechanisms. Robots equipped with diagnostic tools and replacement modules can perform basic repairs autonomously, minimizing downtime. C. Remote diagnostics. Centralized monitoring platforms track the health of each unit, predicting failures before they occur and scheduling preventive maintenance. 8. Psychological and cyber warfare capabilities. Beyond physical combat, humanoid robots can contribute to psychological and cyber operations. A. Deception tactics. Robots disguised as civilians or friendly forces infiltrate enemy lines to gather intelligence or sow confusion. B. Cyber intrusion. Equipped with hacking tools, humanoid robots infiltrate secure facilities to disable infrastructure or extract sensitive data. C. Propaganda dissemination. Robots equipped with loudspeakers or digital displays broadcast messages to influence public opinion or demoralize enemy troops. The timeline for China, or any nation, to mass produce and deploy a fully functional robot army depends on several factors, including technological maturity, industrial capacity, policy priorities, and the complexity of integrating advanced robotics into military operations. While China has made significant strides in robotics, AI, and autonomous systems, there are still substantial technical, logistical, and ethical hurdles to overcome before such an army can be deployed at scale. Mass-producing millions of robotic units demands immense industrial capacity and supply chain resilience. China's existing expertise in electronics, robotics, and automation gives it a head start in scaling production. However, producing highly specialized components, for example, precision actuators, high-performance processors, at scale requires significant investment. Dependence on rare earth metals, semiconductors, and other critical materials could slow progress if global shortages persist. Assuming current investments continue, China could ramp up production within 5 to 10 years, focusing initially on simpler systems like UGVs and drones before tackling more complex humanoid robots. Deploying a robot army involves not just building the hardware but also integrating it into existing military doctrines and command structures. Soldiers and commanders need training to operate and trust robotic systems. New tactics and strategies must be developed to leverage their unique capabilities. Robots must seamlessly integrate with human forces, legacy equipment, and communication networks. Full integration could take 10 to 15 years, given the time required to refine doctrines, conduct large-scale exercises, and address unforeseen issues. Based on the above factors, here are 3 possible scenarios for when China might deploy a robot army. A. Short-term, 2025 to 2030. Limited deployment. Focus on niche applications, such as border security, logistics, and reconnaissance. Small-scale deployments of unarmed or lightly armed robots in non-combat roles. Example: robot dogs patrolling borders or UGVs supporting infantry units. B. Medium-term, 2030 to 2040. Expanded use. Wider adoption of semi-autonomous systems, including weaponized drones, UGVs, and humanoid robots for urban warfare. Increased emphasis on swarm technologies and AI-driven coordination. Example: autonomous convoys delivering supplies in contested areas or swarms of drones overwhelming enemy defenses. C. Long-term, 2040 plus. Full-scale robot army. Large-scale deployment of fully autonomous humanoid robots and integrated robotic systems across all branches of the military. Advanced AI enables near-human levels of decision-making and adaptability. Example: entire squads composed of humanoid robots conducting independent missions without direct human oversight. Creating a formidable robot army powered by humanoid robots involves integrating cutting-edge technologies across multiple disciplines. From advanced mobility and AI-driven autonomy to weaponization and survivability enhancements, every aspect must work harmoniously to achieve military objectives. While the vision of robotic soldiers is becoming increasingly feasible, it also underscores the urgent need for international dialogue on regulating autonomous weapons to prevent destabilizing consequences. As nations like China push forward in this domain, the race to build the ultimate robot army continues, a race that will shape the future of warfare itself. If you like the content in this episode, please also check out other videos on this channel and subscribe for more updates on China's technology.
Massive trade war in United States history, passing tariffs against Canada, Mexico, the entire European Union, and of course China. It's a bold move from the US president who sent stock markets crashing this week as investors try to make sense of Trump's new trade war with the world. But something very unusual is happening to the United States. The US is quickly isolating itself on the international stage, cutting off relationships with even its closest allies, and as I'll prove in today's video, shifting a tremendous amount of power to the other side of the world, where China is patiently waiting. A new poll from YouGov shows that favorability towards the US has fallen across Western Europe following the re-election of President Trump. But while Europeans struggle to make sense of Trump's reversal on Ukraine and shift towards a settlement with Russia, there is one country who has sent a clear signal to Washington, D.C. that they are prepared for any war the United States wants to embark upon. Just check out this tweet from the Chinese embassy, who wrote, "If war is what the US wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end." This tweet garnered over 16.4 million views on Twitter and is significant for many reasons. The first being Chinese government officials almost never speak this boldly or directly. It is Chinese culture to be more subtle and indirect, but this tweet shows just how confident the Chinese feel about their ability to survive Trump's new trade war. Just listen to the insights of David Li, the director of Beijing's Tsinghua University, who shares exactly what the Chinese government is thinking.
I strongly believe this time around, tariff is no longer a big issue. I would even, if you give me an order of 3 top issues in China or challenges in China, I don't even put top 3, even among the top 3, the tariff from President Trump. In fact, the whole economy was preparing for 40% or even 60% of tariff hike from President Trump. Now he's only imposing 10%. It's smaller than the year of 2018. So this time around, the Chinese economy is fully prepared.
When Trump launched the first trade war against China in 2018, Chinese officials had little time to prepare. The Chinese economy took a hit and certain industries suffered. But over time, China adjusted and found ways to be resilient and work hard around tariffs to expand the Chinese economy. While Donald Trump and Joe Biden couldn't be more opposite in their political views, their views on trying to contain China's rise are practically the same. When Biden came into office, he expanded Trump's trade war and aggressively tried to contain China's rise through expanded tariffs and sanctions. Fast forward to the 2024 election, and China knew exactly how to handle Trump's second term in office. But here is where things get very interesting, because Donald Trump is now passing more aggressive tariffs against some of America's closest allies and friends. Take, for example, the Canadian dairy industry, which Trump has now threatened a 250% tariff against. Trump knows he has complete leverage over Canada because Canada's economy is much smaller than America's. Of course, it makes zero sense for Trump to go after Canada, America's most trusted ally, friend, and neighbor. But like I mentioned at the start of today's video, Donald Trump is alienating the United States on the global stage. And this is where Trump's tariff war is going to experience a massive problem. On the campaign trail, Trump promised American voters he was going to target China with significant tariffs to bring manufacturing jobs back to America. But the simple reality is the US economy and your average American depends on imports from China for their normal daily life. The best case study on this is Walmart, America's largest retail store. Estimates say that Chinese suppliers make up 70 to 80% of Walmart's merchandise, leaving less than 20% for American-made products. While Trump may talk a big game and preach to his core followers that tariffs against China will bring back manufacturing jobs to America, many people are starting to wake up to the reality of this plan not working at all. To prove my point, just listen to this incredible argument between a CNBC anchor and U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, who argues about Trump's plan to bring manufacturing back from China to America.
T-shirts, this is the golden sneakers, age, towels, and you're talking about it today. Are we going to make all those things in the United States? None of them are made here. TVs, electronics.
We harmed American workers in exchange for what? Donald Trump understands it. He's going to bring it back.
The CNBC host literally laughs at Trump's Secretary of Commerce, who suggests that t-shirts, sneakers, towels, and TVs will again be made in the United States as a result of Trump's trade war. The simple truth is Trump's new tariffs against China will not result in suppliers choosing American manufacturers. The speed, quality, efficiency, and price of supplying nearly anything from China is just too good these days. Labor costs in the US are significantly higher than in China, while production speed is significantly slower. There is such a striking difference in manufacturing capabilities and prices between China and the US that even a 100% tariff still won't shift the choice to an American manufacturer, even if there was one to choose. Labor costs in the US are undeniably high, but that's not unique to America. Many European nations face the same, if not steeper costs. The difference? Most of them aren't slapping tariffs on Chinese goods under the guise of revising domestic manufacturing. The truth is, Western countries have largely strayed from the free market principles that once made them economic powerhouses. There's no denying the strength of US business, its innovation, entrepreneurial drive, and global influence. But when it comes to the efficiency, precision, infrastructure, and sheer work ethic needed to manufacture at scale, China is pulling ahead. It's doing so by continuously reforming, embracing competition, and rewarding hard work. Tariffs may be a political bargaining chip, and talks of reclaiming stolen jobs are most likely just rhetoric, because anyone in the business of sourcing products knows the reality. These 10, 20, or even 45% tariffs won't stop companies from buying from China. They'll just make it slightly more expensive, and that's it. To give you a concrete example of why China is not concerned with Trump's trade war, take a look at this insight from Princeton researcher Kyle Chan, who shares, China is basically trying to produce the entire semiconductor supply chain domestically, which I don't think any country has tried to do before. Here are some key segments within the chip industry and examples of Chinese players. Before Trump's first trade war in 2018, China had no ambition to build an entire supply chain for the semiconductor industry. But when the US government forces you into a corner and gives no other options, China has to pivot and start building their own ecosystem. We've actually seen this play out before with the US government banning NASA from working directly with Chinese astronauts. China wanted to build a robust space program and were forced to do the unthinkable, build an entirely new space station from scratch, which they successfully completed in November 2022. Now China is trying to change the future of the semiconductor industry, and let's be clear, if China can pull this off, It would be one of the most impressive accomplishments in modern history. As of now, no single country or region can produce advanced microchips entirely by themselves due to the highly specialized and globalized nature of the semiconductor supply chain. Technology is needed from the United States, Germany, the Netherlands, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and China to produce the world's most advanced microchips. The semiconductor industry is a triumph of global collaboration and shows what can happen when the world works together. But Trump is shifting away from the global economy and instead embracing protectionist policies that will stop global collaboration and innovation. But Donald Trump is in for a rude awakening, as Americans are starting to express frustration with his foreign policy. Earlier this week, it was reported that Trump's approval rating has crashed, with only 37% of Americans approving of the way Trump is handling foreign policy, while 50% disapprove, giving the president a net approval rating of minus 13 points. Remember how I opened today's video stating that China is patiently waiting on the other side of the world, watching America alienate itself on the world stage? Well, to further understand what this means for our global economy, I want you to look at this recent article from CNBC's Money Report, which shares that tensions between Trump and Europe could have an unintended beneficiary: China. Strains between the US and Europe came to a head last week during a disastrous meeting between Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Ukrainian President Zelensky in the Oval Office. What started out as a potential signing of a critical minerals deal ended in a public shouting match. To make matters worse, Trump has also made repeated threats of tariffs on EU imports and said that the bloc was formed to screw the United States. The vast majority of Europeans have lost trust in the United States, and this change could lead to one of the largest geopolitical shifts the world has ever seen. Europe has historically aligned with US trade policies designed to protect Western tech innovations and its economic interests. But now that Trump is taking on the European Union and threatening to leave NATO and impose sanctions against the EU, the Europeans have begun exploring the idea of finally thinking independently and no longer being a slave to the American system. Take Dutch chip equipment maker ASML, for example, whose sales of advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment has been restricted by the Dutch government following US export controls. Most of Europe's clamping down on China was at the request of the US government. That is, of course, what happens when Europe is dependent on the US for defense. But if the Europeans are no longer seen as an ally and reliable trade partner in Donald Trump's eyes, the Europeans will finally experience something they haven't felt in over half a century: freedom from being the slaves of US foreign policy. One example of a change in trade policy could be the European Union's current tariffs on Chinese vehicles. As Europe analyzes the future of its auto industry, it might have no choice but to reverse course. The European auto industry has been under increasing pressure as car makers battle with multiple headwinds, ranging from the transition to electric vehicles, rising competition from China, and now the threat of US tariffs. Chinese cooperation could help Europe manufacture the parts needed for its EVs, enabling the bloc to catch up with the technology and meet its sustainability goals. The simple reality is Europe must now look for alternative markets to the US, and we are already witnessing some European countries work towards this plan. The New York Times reported that Spain has opened its doors to China as a European trade war looms. The Port of Barcelona has approved plans to build a terminal with direct access to the port's railway for electric vehicles that China is exporting to Europe. This follows another deal the Spanish government signed with Chinese wind turbine manufacturer Envision Energy, who is partnering with the Spanish government and investing $1 billion to build a green hydrogen industrial park in Spain. This deal has opened the door, and now many European countries are wanting to run through it and move closer to China. To help accommodate this demand, the European Parliament has officially lifted restrictions on lawmakers meeting with Chinese officials, allowing more countries the freedom to negotiate new trade deals with China. Honestly, 2 months ago, no one could have predicted the incredible geopolitical shifts we've seen in the first 60 days of Trump 2.0. But this is why we study geopolitics, because decisions from the White House have the ability to change entire markets and shift certain industries. Most of them aren't.
Coffee. Follow me.